The medical bay of Frontier Station Epsilon hummed with the cold efficiency that characterized all Aureen facilities. Dr. Valara Sin moved through the sterile corridors like a ghost made of starlight, her crystalline form refracting the harsh fluorescent lighting into patterns of pale blue and silver that danced across the polished floors. At 26 years old, she was the youngest chief medical officer the Confederacy had ever appointed to a frontier station, a distinction that meant nothing to her beyond its confirmation of what she already knew. She was exceptional at her purpose. Her species did not feel pride the way other races did. The Aureen had evolved beyond such primitive emotional entanglements 3,000 years ago, when the Great Severance had saved them from extinction. Now they existed in perfect isolation, their bodies composed of living crystal that could manipulate cellular structures with unprecedented precision, their minds cool and analytical, their hearts, if they could be said to have hearts, utterly untouchable. Valara paused at the observation window overlooking the main ward. 17 patients occupied the beds below, representing 9 different species from across the Confederacy. A Kralix diplomat recovering from a failed assassination attempt, 2 Velkan miners suffering from radiation poisoning, a therium merchant whose 3 hearts had given out during a business negotiation. Each one was being treated with flawless precision by her staff of 12 medical drones and 3 Aureen assistants who, like her, had never known the warmth of physical contact. It was perfect. It was orderly. It was exactly as medicine should be. Dr. Sin. The voice of her assistant, Torian Vel, resonated through her communication crystal. "We have an incoming emergency. Human military vessel requesting immediate docking clearance. They report multiple casualties from a skirmish in the Tarvon sector." Valara's luminous eyes, faceted like diamonds and completely devoid of pupils, flickered with what another species might have interpreted as annoyance. Humans. Of course it was humans. In her 5 years stationed at Epsilon, she had treated more human casualties than any other species, and not because they were particularly numerous in this sector. Humans were reckless. They threw themselves into situations that more evolved species knew to avoid, driven by emotions they couldn't control and attachments they couldn't sever. "Prepare Quarantine Bay 3, she said, her voice emanating not from a mouth, but from the harmonic vibration of her crystalline structure. "Standard protocol for combat trauma. And Torian, remind the staff that humans are particularly volatile when injured. Do not engage with their emotional displays." "Understood, Doctor." Valara made her way to the quarantine bay, her movements utterly silent despite her 7-foot frame. She had studied human physiology extensively, of course. It was part of her training. She knew that their bodies were fragile compositions of flesh and bone, that their emotional centers were overdeveloped to a degree that interfered with rational thought, that they formed something called bonds that caused them genuine psychological distress when severed. She found it all rather pathetic if she allowed herself such judgments, which she didn't. The Aureen did not judge. They observed, they analyzed, they treated, and they maintained appropriate distance. The docking bay doors hissed open, with a blast of recycled air that carried the acrid smell of burned metal, and something else, something organic and unpleasant, that Valara's sensors identified as human blood. The vessel that limped into the bay was a mid-class frigate, its hull scarred with weapon impacts and emergency patches that suggested the crew had barely made it to the station alive. 6 humans emerged first, carrying stretchers. Valara's clinical assessment began immediately. Elevated heart rates, dilated pupils, stress hormones flooding their systems in quantities that would have killed most Confederacy species. They were all young, she noted. Humans rarely sent their elders into combat. These warriors couldn't have been older than their late 20s, their faces smudged with soot and exhaustion, their uniforms torn and stained. "We need help now." The human barking orders was a female, her dark hair pulled back in a style Valara's database identified as a regulation bun, her right arm hanging useless at her side. "We've got 3 critical, 4 serious, and place them in the designated areas." Valara's voice cut through the chaos like a laser through fog. "My staff will perform triage. You will wait in the anteroom until you are called." The female human's face did something complex, a tightening around the eyes, a compression of the lips. Anger, Valara's analysis subroutines suggested, anger mixed with desperation and fear. "With all due respect, Doctor, we need treatment immediately. My people are dying. Your people will receive appropriate care in the order of medical priority." Valara replied, already moving past the human to examine the first casualty. Your emotional state is noted and dismissed as irrelevant to treatment protocols. She heard the human female make a sound, something between a laugh and a sob, but Valara had already shifted her focus to the patient before her. A young male, barely conscious, his abdomen torn open by what appeared to be plasma fire. His internal organs were visible, several of them damaged beyond conventional repair. A mortal wound for most species, but not for an Aureen healer. Valara extended her hands, her crystalline fingers beginning to glow with concentrated medical energy. She had performed this procedure thousands of times. She would knit the tissue, repair the organs, stabilize the patient. She would do it without touching him, maintaining the sacred distance that preserved her power and her purity. The healing energy would flow from her into his body without any direct contact. Pure medical science, uncontaminated by the weakness of physical connection. She was beginning the procedure when she heard the footsteps behind her, heavier than the others, more controlled. She didn't turn. She didn't need to. Her sensory array told her everything. Male human, approximately 6 feet tall, 180 pounds, multiple contusions and lacerations, stress markers elevated but controlled, and something else, something that made her crystalline structure vibrate in a way she had never experienced before. Authority. This human carried authority like a weapon. Dr. Sin. The voice was deeper than the female's, rough with exhaustion, but steady with command. I'm Captain Marcus Webb. That's my crew on those tables. I need to know if they're going to survive. Valara did not pause in her work. You will be informed of their status when I have completed my assessment. Your presence in the treatment area violates protocols. Remove yourself to the waiting area. I'm not leaving my people. Now she did pause, turning her faceted gaze toward him. Captain Marcus Webb was younger than she had expected, perhaps 28 or 29 in human years, which meant he had risen to his rank with unusual speed. His face was striking in the way human faces sometimes were, with sharp features that suggested both strength and something else. Intelligence, perhaps, or pain. His eyes were a pale grey that reminded her of storm clouds on worlds she had never visited, and they were looking at her with an intensity that would have made a less disciplined being uncomfortable. Captain Webb, she said, each syllable perfectly measured. I am aware that your species forms emotional attachments that you call loyalty. I am aware that witnessing the suffering of your unit causes you psychological distress. These facts do not change medical protocol. You will wait outside, or I will have station security remove you. For a long moment he simply stared at her. Then, incredibly, he smiled. It was not a happy expression. It was the kind of smile that came from seeing something absurd in the midst of tragedy. You've never served in combat, have you, Doctor? My service record is not your concern. That's a no. He moved closer, and Valara's sensors screamed warnings about personal space violations. Let me explain something about humans, since you clearly don't understand us. We don't leave our people. We don't watch from waiting rooms while they die. We don't follow protocols that tell us to abandon our family when they need us most. They are not your family. They are your colleagues. Same thing. Valara felt something she had not experienced in her entire existence, a sensation like static electricity crackling across her crystalline surface. It was illogical. It was impossible. Humans could not affect Aureen with their mere presence, and yet here she was, her perfect composure threatened by nothing more than a young human captain who refused to follow simple instructions. You are being irrational, she said. I'm being human, he replied. Maybe you should look that up in your database. Before she could respond, alarms shrieked through the medical bay. The young male on the table, the one she had been treating, had gone into cardiac arrest. His heart, already damaged by plasma fire, was giving up the fight. Valara moved instantly, her hands hovering over his chest, her power flowing in controlled waves that should have restarted his heart immediately. But the damage was too severe. The organ had suffered catastrophic failure. She increased the power, her entire form beginning to glow with the strain of channeling so much healing energy at once. Nothing. The human's heart remained still. You need to shock him. Captain Webb's voice was suddenly at her side, and she realized with alarm that he had moved around the table to stand directly beside her. Defibrillation. Do you have the equipment? Aureen healing does not require primitive electrical devices. I can restart his heart with... He's dying now. Valara looked down at the young man's face. He couldn't have been older than 23. His features were slack, his skin growing paler by the second. By her calculations, he had perhaps 90 seconds before brain death became irreversible. She had never failed to save a patient. Never. In 5 years of practice, her success rate was 100%. She was the youngest chief medical officer in Confederacy history because she was perfect at what she did. But this human was dying, and her perfection was not enough. "Please." The word came from Captain Webb, and it was said in a tone she had never heard before. Not a command, not a demand, a request that carried the weight of every hope and fear a being could experience. "I'm begging you, Doctor. Do whatever it takes. He's 24 years old. He has a mother waiting for him on Earth. He jokes about making terrible coffee, and he plays the guitar, and he saved my life 3 times in the last month alone. Please, I know your species doesn't touch anyone. I know it's against everything you believe. But if there's even a chance..." And then he did something that would change everything. Captain Marcus Webb reached out and placed his hand over hers. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The moment his flesh made contact with her crystalline surface, every warning Valara had ever learned, every protocol drilled into her since childhood, every fundamental truth about Aureen existence shattered like glass under a hammer. Pain exploded through her structure. Not physical pain, but something infinitely worse. Sensation. Raw, unfiltered, overwhelming sensation. She could feel his warmth, the texture of his skin, the microscopic ridges of his fingerprints. She could sense his pulse, his blood moving through his veins, the electrical firing of his neurons. She could feel his fear, his desperation, his hope, his grief, emotions pouring into her, like water into a vessel that had never been designed to hold them. And beneath it all, like a forgotten song suddenly remembered, something ancient and terrible stirred within her crystalline core. A memory that was not hers, a truth that her species had spent 3,000 years trying to erase. The Aureen had not always been untouchable. Once, long ago, they had known touch. They had craved it. They had needed it. And they had lost everything because of it. "Dr. Sin!" Torian Vell's horrified voice shattered her paralysis. "What are you? You must break contact immediately. You will lose your gift." But Valara was no longer listening to her assistant. She was no longer following protocols or maintaining appropriate distance. Because in that moment of contact, as Captain Marcus Webb's hand remained pressed against hers, she felt her power surge beyond anything she had ever experienced. Not diminish, not corrupt, not destroy, amplify. Her free hand shot out to hover over the dying soldier's chest, and healing energy poured from her in a torrent that lit up the entire medical bay like a newborn star. It was too much power, more than any Aureen should have been able to channel, more than the medical equipment should have been able to sustain. But it was enough. The young man's back arched off the table, his eyes flew open, and his heart, that fragile human heart that had been seconds from failure, began to beat again. Valara staggered backward, breaking contact with Captain Webb, her entire form trembling with aftershocks of sensation she had no framework to process. The medical bay had gone silent, except for the steady beep of monitors, confirming that her patient was alive, stable, and recovering with impossible speed. Everyone was staring at her, her staff, the human crew, and Captain Webb, whose storm-grey eyes were wide with something that looked like wonder and horror mixed in equal measure. "What did you do?" Torian whispered, his crystalline form flickering with distress. "What did you just do?" Valara looked down at her hand, the one that Captain Webb had touched. It was unchanged, still the same flawless crystal it had always been, but she could still feel the ghost of his warmth, the echo of his presence like a phantom limb she had never known she was missing. "I saved him," she heard herself say, her voice lacking its usual perfect modulation. "I saved him. You let him touch you." Torian's horror was palpable. "You let a human, a primitive, emotional human, make physical contact. You are contaminated. You are alive." The word came from somewhere deep within her, from a place she had not known existed. "I feel alive." Captain Marcus Webb took a step toward her, his hand still outstretched, and Valara felt herself do something no Aureen had done in 3,000 years. She did not move away. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I don't know what just happened, but thank you for saving his life." Behind him, his crew was beginning to crowd around the table, their voices raised in relief and joy and half a dozen other emotions that Valara could suddenly sense with perfect clarity. She should have been disgusted by this display. She should have been reinforcing protocols, maintaining distance, restoring order. Instead, She found herself unable to look away from the young captain who had dared to touch the untouchable, and somewhere deep in the oldest archives of her genetic memory, locked away behind 3,000 years of enforced isolation, a warning began to pulse like a heartbeat. The severance had happened for a reason. The Aureen had given up touch not out of choice, but out of necessity. Because the last time they had allowed themselves to feel, to connect, to love, Valara forced the thought away. She had patients to treat, protocols to follow, a reputation to maintain. But as she turned back to her work, she could still feel the ghost of Marcus Webb's hand on hers, and the certainty that everything she had believed about her species, her purpose and herself, had just been irrevocably shattered by a single moment of forbidden contact. In the corner of the medical bay, a monitoring system that had been dormant for 3 millennia flickered to life, its ancient Aureen script scrolling across a display that no one noticed. Warning: severance breach detected. Contact protocol violated. Initiating historical recall sequence. The Council must be notified. But Valara, focused on treating the remaining casualties with hands that still trembled from sensation, did not see the alert. She did not know that in a crystal spire halfway across the galaxy, ancient beings who had not moved in 1,000 years were beginning to wake. She knew only that for the first time in her life, she understood why her species had once been willing to risk everything for the simple act of touch, and she knew with terrible certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. The next 4 hours passed in a blur of controlled chaos that Valara navigated with the precision that had made her legendary among Confederacy medical professionals. She treated 17 patients, performing 3 emergency surgeries, 2 organ regenerations, and countless tissue repairs. Her hands moved with mechanical efficiency, her diagnostic protocols functioned flawlessly, and her success rate remained perfect. But everything had changed. She could feel it in every movement, every breath of recycled station air, every flicker of light across her crystalline surface. The world had texture now, temperature, weight. The sterile medical bay that had always been nothing more than a functional workspace now pressed against her senses with overwhelming presence. The hum of the environmental systems was no longer just data to be filtered. It was sound, real and physical, vibrating through her structure in ways that made her want to either sing or scream. And worst of all, she could feel them, the humans. Their emotions radiated from them like heat from a star, and now that she had been touched, now that the barriers her species had built over millennia had been shattered, she could no longer block them out. Fear from the wounded, relief from those who would survive, grief from a young woman who kept vigil beside a soldier who had not made it, and from Captain Marcus Webb, who stood in the corner of the bay refusing to leave despite her repeated orders, a complex mixture of guilt, determination, gratitude, and something else she didn't have a name for. Valara finished sealing the last incision on a Velkan engineer and stepped back, her hands still glowing faintly with residual healing energy. Every member of her staff had watched her work with expressions ranging from shock to horror. They had all witnessed the touch. They had all seen what should have been impossible, an Aureen making physical contact with another being and not only surviving, but thriving. Dr. Sin, Torian Vel approached her with the cautious movements of someone approaching a potentially explosive device. The patients are stable. The human casualties will all survive, but we need to discuss what happened. The protocols are being followed, Valara interrupted, her voice steady despite the chaos roiling inside her. I saved every patient brought to this facility. My success rate remains unblemished. The protocols regarding medical outcomes have been perfectly maintained. You know that's not what I mean. Torian's crystalline form flickered with agitation. You made contact, physical contact, with a human. The Council will need to be informed immediately. The Council oversees medical standards, not personal conduct. Personal conduct? Torian's voice rose in pitch, a sure sign of distress among their species. Valara, this isn't about conduct. This is about the severance, about everything our species has built over 3,000 years. You don't understand what you've done. You can't possibly... I understand perfectly. Valara turned to face her assistant fully, and she saw him flinch at whatever he read in her faceted eyes. I understand that I saved a life that would have been lost. I understand that my abilities were not corrupted by contact, but enhanced. And I understand that you are afraid of what that means. Of course I'm afraid. The words burst from Torian like water breaching a dam. Everyone should be afraid. The severance exists for a reason, Valara. Our ancestors didn't choose isolation out of cruelty or ignorance. They chose it because the alternative was extinction. Touch leads to connection. Connection leads to attachment. Attachment leads to... He stopped abruptly, his form going rigid. To what? Valara pressed. What are you not saying, Torian? What part of our history have we been told to forget? But her assistant was already backing away, his crystalline structure flickering between solid and translucent, with barely controlled panic. I've said too much already. I need to file my report. The council will send investigators. They'll want to examine you, to determine if you've been compromised. I'm sorry, Valara, I truly am, but this is bigger than both of us. He turned and fled the medical bay, moving with a speed that suggested genuine terror. Valara stood alone in the center of her domain, surrounded by sleeping patients and humming machines, and felt the weight of isolation pressing down on her with crushing force. She had just saved 17 lives. She had performed miracles of medicine that would be studied for years to come. She had proven herself capable of feats that should have been impossible, and her own species was preparing to condemn her for it. He's scared of you. The voice made her spin around. Captain Marcus Webb had moved closer while she was distracted, closing the distance between them with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to navigating dangerous situations. He stood perhaps 6 feet away, close enough that she could see the exhaustion etched into every line of his face, far enough that he wasn't violating the personal space protocols that Aureen found so critical. My assistant is not your concern, Captain. Maybe not, but you are. Valara felt that strange electricity crackling across her surface again, the sensation she had no name for and no defense against. Explain that statement. Marcus ran a hand through his dark hair, leaving it disheveled in a way that should have looked unprofessional, but somehow made him appear more real, more present than any being she had ever encountered. Look, I don't understand what just happened in here. I don't understand your species or your rules, or why everyone seems to think the world is ending because I touched your hand. But I do understand people, and right now you look like someone who just discovered that everything they believed was a lie. You presume too much. Do I? He took another step closer, and Valara found herself unable to retreat. I saw what happened when we made contact. I felt it. Whatever you are, whatever your species thinks you're supposed to be, that thing that happened when you touched me, that was real. That was power. And now everyone's treating you like you're contaminated. I am contaminated. The words emerged before Valara could stop them, raw and unfiltered in a way that horrified her. By your species' standards, perhaps not, but by mine, I have violated the most sacred law of Aureen existence. I have allowed physical contact. I have experienced touch, and according to 3,000 years of history, I should now be losing my abilities, descending into emotional chaos, becoming everything my species evolved to avoid. But you're not. Marcus gestured toward the medical bay around them. You just saved all of these people, including mine. You're stronger than before, not weaker, which makes it worse. Valara looked down at her hands, these crystalline structures that had suddenly become foreign to her. If touch corrupts us, if contact destroys our gifts, then the severance makes sense. It's sacrifice for the greater good. But if touch enhances us, if connection makes us stronger, then your species has been living a lie for 3,000 years, Marcus finished quietly, and the people in charge have a lot to lose if that truth comes out. The simple clarity of his logic cut through the chaos in Valara's mind like a blade. Of course that was the real danger, not that she had violated a sacred law, but that she had proven the law itself was wrong. The council, the elders, everyone who had built their authority on maintaining the severance, they would all be revealed as either fools or liars, and they would do anything to prevent that revelation. You need to leave the station, she said abruptly. Take your crew and depart immediately. When the council's investigators arrive, I don't want you anywhere near me. If they believe you somehow forced this contact, if they think humans pose a threat to Aureen purity, I'm not leaving you to face this alone. The words hit her with physical force. Valara stared at the young human captain, at this being who had known her for less than 5 hours, who had every reason to flee before he was caught in the storm that was surely coming, and who was instead standing his ground with the stubborn determination that seemed to define his species. You don't owe me anything, Captain Webb. Marcus, my name is Marcus. He smiled slightly, that same sad expression she had seen earlier. And you're wrong. I owe you everything. You saved my crew when you had every right to refuse. You risked whatever you risked when you let me touch you. I don't abandon people who put themselves on the line for my team. This isn't your fight. Maybe not, but I'm making it my fight anyway. He paused, his grey eyes searching her fasted ones. Besides, I'm curious. You said touch was supposed to destroy your abilities, but when we made contact I felt something, like electricity but not painful, like connection, and for just a second I could sense things about you. Your fear, your confusion, your absolute terror at feeling something for the first time in your life. Valara's structure went rigid. You could sense my emotions? Just for a moment, when we were touching. Marcus tilted his head, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away. Is that normal? For your species? No. The word emerged as barely a whisper. Aureen do not share emotional states. We exist in isolation by design. The fact that you could sense anything from me is impossible, terrifying. They stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of implications hanging between them like a guillotine blade waiting to fall. Then Marcus did something completely unexpected. He extended his hand toward her, palm up, in a gesture that her cultural database identified as an offering of trust among humans. I think we both know this is bigger than either of us, he said quietly. I think we both know that whatever happened when we touched wasn't an accident. So here's what I'm proposing. We work together to figure this out. No more secrets, no more protocols. Just two people trying to understand something that shouldn't be possible. Valara looked at his outstretched hand. She knew that taking it would be crossing a line she could never uncross. She knew that every moment of contact would bind her more tightly to this human, to his emotions, to his presence. She knew that the council would see this as ultimate proof of her corruption. She took his hand. The sensation was less shocking this time, but no less intense. His warmth flowed into her crystalline structure, his pulse synchronized with rhythms she hadn't known her species possessed. And beneath the surface, like tides pulling at the shore, she felt his emotions wash through her, concern, determination, curiosity, and something else, something that felt almost like recognition, as if some part of him had been waiting his entire life for this moment. What's happening to us? She whispered. Marcus squeezed her hand gently, and Valara felt the pressure like a revelation. I don't know, but we're going to find out together. The moment shattered as alarms began screaming throughout the station. Red emergency lights strobed across the medical bay, and a voice that Valara recognized as Station Commander Thex boomed through the communication system. All personnel be advised. We have incoming vessels, Aureen Council ships, 3 of them, approaching at maximum speed. They are demanding immediate access to Medical Bay 7 and the detention of Dr. Valara Sin for severance protocol violations. All staff are ordered to cooperate fully with Council investigators. This is not a drill. Valara felt Marcus's hand tighten on hers, felt his body shift into a combat-ready stance, even as his expression remained calm. 3 ships, he said quietly, for 1 doctor. They're not here to investigate, Valara. They're here to make sure you can't talk. They're here to restore order, to prevent contamination from spreading. They're here to bury the truth. Marcus looked toward the medical bay entrance, where armed security personnel were already assembling. How much do you trust your own species? Valara wanted to say that she trusted them completely, that the council would be fair, that the severance existed for logical reasons that she simply didn't understand yet. But as she looked at the guards positioning themselves to block all exits, as she felt the fear radiating from her own medical staff, who were backing away from her like she carried a plague, as she sensed the cold determination of the approaching council ships, she realized something fundamental. Her species didn't want to study what had happened to her. They wanted to erase it. I don't know, she admitted. I don't know anything anymore. Then trust me. Marcus turned to face her fully, his hand still clasped around hers. I've spent my whole life learning to read situations, to know when someone's telling the truth and when they're feeding me lies. And right now, every instinct I have is screaming that if you let them take you onto those ships, you're never coming back. Where would I go? This is my home. These are my people. Are they? He gestured toward the medical staff who were now huddled in the far corner of the bay, whispering among themselves and refusing to meet her eyes. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like your people just decided you're the enemy. Before Valara could respond, the medical bay doors hissed open. Commander Thex entered, flanked by 6 armed guards and followed by a figure that made Valara's crystalline structure contract with instinctive dread. Councillor Eris Thane was old, even by Aureen standards. Her crystalline form had the deep, multifaceted quality that came from centuries of existence, and her presence radiated authority like a physical force. She had been on the council for over 500 years, one of the architects of modern Aureen society, a guardian of the severance itself, and she was looking at Valara with an expression that transcended mere disapproval. It was the look of someone who had just discovered a cancer and was preparing to cut it out before it could spread. Dr. Valara Sin, Councillor Thane's voice resonated with harmonics that made every Aureen in the bay instinctively stand at attention. You are hereby placed under council custody for immediate transport and evaluation. You will surrender yourself without resistance and submit to cleansing protocols. This is not a request. Valara felt Marcus tense beside her, felt his hand tighten on hers in a gesture of support that would have been meaningless hours ago, and now felt like the only thing keeping her anchored to reality. Councillor Thane, she said, forcing her voice to remain steady, I have committed no crime. I saved lives using my abilities, which remain fully functional. If you wish to study what occurred, I will cooperate fully, but I will not surrender to undefined cleansing protocols without understanding what they entail. The councillor's eyes, ancient and cold as the void between stars, narrowed. You dare question the council? You who have violated the most sacred law of our species? You who have allowed contamination by a primitive emotional race? Her gaze shifted to Marcus, and her distaste was palpable. Release the human immediately. Extended contact will only deepen the corruption. No. The word emerged from Valara before she had consciously decided to speak it. I will not release him. And I am not corrupted. I am enhanced. My abilities have grown stronger through contact, not weaker. Doesn't that suggest that perhaps our understanding of the severance is incomplete? The silence that followed was absolute. Every being in the medical bay froze, as if Valara had just uttered the most profound blasphemy imaginable. Then Councillor Thane smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Valara had ever witnessed. There it is, the ancient Aureen said softly. The corruption reveals itself. You have experienced touch for mere hours, and already you question 3,000 years of wisdom. Already you suggest that your individual experience outweighs the collective knowledge of our entire civilization. She gestured to the guards. Take her. Use force if necessary, and remove the human from the station. Permanently. The guards moved forward, their weapons humming to life with the distinct sound of stun settings. Marcus shifted his stance, and Valara realized with horror that he was preparing to fight, to throw himself between her and armed security personnel in a gesture that was as suicidal as it was noble. Marcus, no! But before either of them could act, something impossible happened. The lights in the medical bay flickered once, then exploded in a cascade of sparks that sent everyone diving for cover. In the sudden darkness, Valara felt her crystalline structure begin to glow with an intensity she had never achieved before, illuminating the bay with light that seemed to come from somewhere beyond the physical spectrum. And in that light, for just an instant, she saw something that made her entire understanding of reality shatter. Standing behind Councillor Thane, visible only to Valara's enhanced senses, was a figure that didn't belong. Another Aureen, but different. Ancient beyond measure, its crystalline form fractured and reformed in patterns that suggested it existed in multiple states simultaneously, and it was looking directly at her with eyes that held something she had never seen in another of her species: compassion. The figure raised one hand in a gesture of benediction, and Valara heard a voice that resonated not through sound, but directly into her crystalline matrix. Run, daughter of the old ways. The council knows what they hide, and they will destroy you to keep it hidden. Find the archive. Learn what we were before the severance, and remember, you are not the first to be touched, nor will you be the last. The truth is waking, and with it, our species faces a choice: evolve or die. Then the figure was gone, and the emergency lighting kicked in, bathing the medical bay in red light that made everything look like a scene from someone else's nightmare. Councillor Thane was rising from where she had taken cover, her ancient form radiating fury. What was that? What did you do? But Valara was already moving, without thinking, without planning, acting purely on instinct that came from a source she didn't understand. She grabbed Marcus's hand and ran. Behind them, she heard Councillor Thane screaming orders, heard the sound of weapons charging, heard the entire station erupting into chaos. But she didn't stop, couldn't stop, because for the first time in her life, Dr. Valara Sin was doing something no Aureen was supposed to be capable of. She was choosing emotion over logic, connection over isolation, and an uncertain future with a human she barely knew over the safe, sterile, perfect life her species had planned for her. She was choosing to be free, and as they raced through the corridors of Frontier Station Epsilon, with alarms screaming around them and an entire civilization's worth of authority pursuing them, Valara felt something that should have terrified her, but instead felt like coming home. She felt alive. Marcus Webb had spent 10 years in military service, 6 of them in active combat zones across the outer territories. He had piloted damaged ships through asteroid fields, negotiated with hostile alien warlords, and once talked down a Krylix berserker who had taken an entire diplomatic delegation hostage. He considered himself reasonably competent at handling high-pressure situations, but nothing in his training had prepared him for running through a space station while holding hands with a glowing crystalline alien doctor who apparently had her entire species trying to capture her. "Left!" Valara's voice cut through the chaos, and Marcus obeyed without question, yanking them both around a corner just as energy weapons fire scorched the bulkhead where they had been standing. The station's security forces were right behind them, and from the sound of it they were no longer bothering with stun settings. "They're shooting to kill!" Marcus panted, his free hand instinctively going to where his sidearm should have been. But weapons weren't allowed in medical facilities, and his pistol was still locked in his ship's armory. "I thought your people didn't believe in violence. They don't believe in allowing contamination to spread." Valara pulled him through a maintenance access door that her medical clearance must have unlocked. "To the Council, I am no longer a person. I am a disease vector that must be eliminated before I infect others." The maintenance corridor was narrow and poorly lit, filled with the humming machinery that kept a Frontier station operational. Marcus could hear pursuing footsteps echoing behind them, getting closer with each passing second. They needed a ship. They needed weapons. They needed a plan. "My frigate," he said, his tactical mind already working through options. "If we can reach the docking bay, your ship will be the first place they look." Valara's crystalline form was pulsing with light that seemed to intensify with her stress. "They will have already placed guards at every docking port. The moment you approach your vessel, they will open fire." "Then what do you suggest? Because running through maintenance tunnels isn't going to work forever." Valara slowed their pace, her faceted eyes unfocusing in a way that Marcus had learned meant she was accessing some kind of internal database. "The figure I saw, the ancient Aureen. It told me to find something called the Archive. Do you know what that might be?" Marcus searched his memory of station schematics and Confederacy intelligence reports. "The Archive? Wait, there are old stories about a repository. Pre-Confederacy, maybe even pre-Severance. Supposed to contain historical records that got buried when your species joined the galactic community. But those are just rumors. Nobody even knows if it really exists." "It exists." Valara's voice carried absolute certainty. "I can feel it, like a pull in my core structure pointing towards something I never knew was there. The touch awakened something in me, Marcus. Not just sensation, not just emotion, memory. Ancient memory that was locked away." She turned to face him fully in the narrow corridor, her luminous form casting dancing shadows across the metal walls. Even covered in dust from their flight, even with alarms screaming around them, she was the most beautiful thing Marcus had ever seen. The thought struck him with unexpected force, and from the way Valara's light flickered, he wondered if she had somehow sensed it. "If we go to this archive," she continued, "we may find answers, or we may find nothing but more questions. But it is the only lead we have to understand what is really happening." "And you trust this vision? This ancient Aureen who appeared to you during a power surge could have been a hallucination, stress-induced, maybe brought on by the touch, or it could have been real." Valara's hand tightened on his, and Marcus felt that electric connection pulse between them. "I am a scientist, Marcus. I deal in evidence and verifiable data, but I am also beginning to understand that my species has spent 3,000 years hiding from a truth that terrifies them. And if there is even a chance that this archive contains proof of what we were before the severance, then we have to find it." Marcus studied her crystalline features, reading the determination there mixed with fear and something else. Hope. She was hoping that her entire civilization's foundational belief was wrong. That had to be the loneliest feeling in the universe. "Okay," he said. "How do we find it?" The smile that crossed Valara's face was tentative, like she was still learning how the expression worked. "Follow me. And Marcus, prepare yourself for what we might discover." They moved deeper into the station's infrastructure, following corridors that grew progressively older and less maintained. Marcus noticed that the construction materials changed as they descended, from modern composite alloys to ancient crystalline structures that resembled Valara's own form. This part of the station predated the Confederacy itself, built by Aureen hands in an era when their species had been very different. "This is the original settlement," Valara explained, as they navigated through chambers filled with dormant machinery. Before Frontier Station Epsilon was expanded and modernized, this was a research outpost, one of the first Aureen colonies outside our home system, established nearly 4,000 years ago, before the severance. Yes. She paused at a massive door covered in script that Marcus's translation implant couldn't process. "Before we learned to fear touch, before we decided that isolation was preferable to connection, before we became what we are now." Valara placed her free hand against the door, and Marcus felt power surge through her crystalline structure. The ancient script began to glow, responding to her presence in ways that modern Aureen technology never would have. The door shuddered, then slowly began to open, revealing darkness beyond that seemed to swallow even Valara's light. "The Council sealed this area centuries ago," she whispered. "According to official records, it contains nothing but outdated equipment and structural instabilities. But if they went to the trouble of sealing it so thoroughly, then it contains something they don't want found." Marcus squeezed her hand gently. "Whatever's in there, we face it together." They stepped through the doorway into darkness that immediately came alive with light. Not electric light or crystalline glow, but something older and stranger. Bioluminescence, Marcus realized. The walls themselves were alive with organisms that responded to their presence, illuminating a chamber that took his breath away. The archive was vast. Shelves and display cases stretched into the distance, filled with crystalline data storage devices, ancient texts in languages Marcus had never seen, and artifacts that seemed to pulse with their own internal light. But it was the walls that captured his attention. Every surface was covered in murals, intricate scenes carved or grown into the crystalline structure itself, depicting a history that bore no resemblance to anything he knew about the Aureen. In the murals, Aureen were touching each other, embracing. Their crystalline forms were intertwined in ways that suggested profound connection, their lights merging and dancing together in patterns of impossible beauty. They were building cities together, creating art together, raising children together, all through touch, through connection, through physical contact that modern Aureen considered an abomination. "By the lights of the first choir," Valara breathed, her hand trembling in Marcus's. "This is what we were. This is what the severance took from us." They moved deeper into the archive, and the murals told a story that grew progressively darker. War came to the beautiful, touching civilization, not from outside but from within. The images showed Aureen turning on each other, their connections becoming weapons, their touch spreading something that looked like corruption or disease. Entire cities fell dark, thousands died, and in the final murals the survivors stood apart from each other, their forms rigid and separate, choosing isolation over extinction. "The severance wasn't just cultural," Marcus said quietly. "It was survival. Something about touch became dangerous to your species." "But what?" Valara pulled him toward a central pedestal where a crystalline data core pulsed with faint light. "What changed? What made connection deadly when it had been the foundation of our entire civilization?" She reached for the data core with her free hand, and the moment she made contact, the archive came fully alive. Light exploded from every surface, and a voice resonated through the chamber, ancient beyond measure, carrying harmonics that made Marcus's bones ache. "Welcome, daughter of the severed. Welcome, human who dares to touch. You seek truth that your council has buried beneath 3,000 years of fear. Very well. Witness." The chamber dissolved into vision. Marcus found himself standing in a city that existed only in memory. Aureen moved through streets of living crystal, their forms touching, connecting, sharing light and thought and emotion in ways that created beauty beyond anything he had ever imagined. This was a civilization at its peak, where art and science merged seamlessly, where individuals were both separate beings and part of a greater whole. Then the vision shifted, and he saw the arrival. Ships came from beyond the known galaxy, vessels that seemed to be made of void itself. And from those ships came beings that were the opposite of everything the Aureen represented. Where Aureen were light and connection, these entities were darkness and isolation. Where Aureen touched and shared, these beings consumed and destroyed. The war that followed was brief and devastating. The invaders had a weapon that turned the Aureen's greatest strength into their greatest weakness. They released something, a corruption, a virus, a concept given physical form that spread through touch. When Aureen connected, the corruption jumped between them, turning their beautiful shared consciousness into a hive mind of pain and madness. Millions died before the Aureen understood what was happening. Millions more died when they tried to fight back. In the end, the only survivors were those who had been isolated when the corruption spread, the researchers on distant stations, the explorers in deep space, the hermits who had chosen solitude even in a society built on connection. The vision showed the Council's formation, showed the desperate decision to make isolation permanent. They couldn't remove the corruption. It had become woven into Aureen genetic structure, dormant but waiting. Touch would always risk activating it. So they created the severance, wrote it into law and culture and religion, and spent 3,000 years convincing their descendants that isolation wasn't a necessity of survival, but a virtue to be celebrated. But that's not the whole truth, the ancient voice continued as the vision faded. Watch what comes next. The scene shifted again, showing something the Council had hidden even more carefully. Over the centuries, a few Aureen had been touched anyway, by accident, by choice, by desperate circumstance, and most of them had died, consumed by the corruption as the Council's propaganda promised. But not all. Marcus saw brief glimpses of individuals throughout history who had been touched and survived, who had grown stronger rather than weaker, who had somehow resisted or overcome the corruption. And in every case, the Council had found them and made them disappear, erasing all evidence of their existence. The corruption is real, Valara whispered beside him, but so is the cure. Some Aureen are immune. Some can survive touch without falling to the darkness. And the Council can't allow anyone to know that, Marcus finished. Because if they admitted that touch could be safe again, if they acknowledged that the severance might not be necessary anymore, their entire authority would collapse. 3,000 years of cultural programming would be revealed as a lie. Our species would have to confront what we lost and why we lost it. Valara's crystalline form was shaking, and they would rather murder anyone who discovers the truth than face that reckoning. The vision ended, leaving them standing in the archive with knowledge that would reshape the galaxy if it ever became public. Marcus felt the weight of it pressing down on him, felt the responsibility of being one of maybe a dozen beings in the entire universe who knew the real history of the severance. Then he felt something else, a presence, cold and vast and utterly opposed to life. Valara, he said quietly, we're not alone. She sensed it too, her free hand coming up in a defensive gesture that made her entire form glow with power. From the shadows at the far end of the archive, something moved. Not an Aureen, not anything that belonged in a place built by living beings. The entity that emerged looked like a hole in reality given approximate shape. It absorbed light rather than reflecting it, moved without disturbing the air, and when Marcus looked directly at it, his mind screamed warnings that this thing was fundamentally wrong. This was what the ancient Aureen had faced 4,000 years ago. This was the corruption given physical form. The Council thought they had destroyed all of you, Valara said, her voice steady despite the terror Marcus could feel radiating from her. They built the severance to prevent you from ever returning. The entity spoke, and its voice was like hearing silence learn to scream. The Council did not destroy us. They invited us in. They made a bargain 3,000 years ago, and we have honored it. We stay dormant in their genetic structure, we do not spread. And in exchange, they maintain the severance. They keep their species isolated and weak. They ensure that Aureen will never again become the connected, powerful civilization that nearly drove us from this galaxy. Understanding crashed over Marcus like a physical blow. The Council knows. They've always known. They're not protecting your species from the corruption, Valara. They're protecting the corruption. They made a deal with these things to stay in power, and now you know too much. The entity moved forward, and Marcus felt cold that had nothing to do with temperature. The human can die, but you, daughter of the severed, you are already infected with our essence. We can feel it dormant in your core. One touch, and you will become ours. So go ahead, touch the human again, deepen your connection, and when the corruption activates, you will join the others we have claimed throughout the centuries. Valara's hand spasmed in Marcus's, and he realized with horror that she was preparing to let go, to release him rather than risk the corruption spreading through their connection. Don't, he said firmly, don't you dare let go. Marcus, you don't understand. If the corruption activates, then we fight it together. He pulled her closer, their faces now inches apart. You saved my crew. You risked everything to do what was right, and I am not leaving you to face this thing alone. The entity laughed, and the sound made the crystalline walls of the archive shudder, touching human sentiment. Literally. Very well, let us see if your connection is strong enough to resist what destroyed a civilization. It lunged forward, moving with impossible speed, and Marcus felt Valara's hand tighten on his as she threw up a barrier of pure medical energy. The entity hit the barrier and screamed, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere beyond normal space. But the barrier was weakening. Marcus could feel it through their connection, could sense Valara's power draining as she fought to hold back an enemy that existed partially outside the physical laws she understood. They had seconds at most before the entity broke through, and when it did, when it touched them, the corruption would activate. Valara would fall to the same fate that had claimed millions of her ancestors. Unless Marcus made a decision that was either the bravest or stupidest thing he had ever done. He pulled Valara close and wrapped his other arm around her, bringing them into full contact for the first time. Not just hands touching, but his entire body pressed against her crystalline form, his warmth flowing into her structure, his heartbeat synchronizing with whatever passed for a pulse in her species. "What are you doing?" she gasped. "Giving you everything I have," he said. "You told me that touch enhanced your power, so take mine. Take my strength, my will, my stubbornness. Take whatever humans have that makes us too stupid to know when we're beaten, and use it to fight." The entity hit the barrier again, and this time it shattered. But as the corruption reached toward them, as the darkness that had destroyed a civilization came to claim 2 more victims, something impossible happened. Valara's power didn't just grow, it transformed. Her crystalline structure began to glow with light that had never existed in any Aureen before. Not the cold, sterile illumination of modern healing energy, but something warm and alive, and fundamentally human. She had taken Marcus's essence, his emotions, his determination, his absolutely irrational belief that love could conquer darkness, and merged it with her own abilities. When the corruption tried to infect her, it found not just an Aureen, but a hybrid. Part crystalline logic, part human heart. The ancient weapon that had destroyed a touching civilization had no defense against something that had never existed before. Valara raised her hands, and power exploded from her in a wave that lit up the archive like a newborn sun. The entity screamed again, but this time the sound carried pain and disbelief. Its darkness burned away in the light, revealing the truth beneath. These beings were parasites, ancient and malevolent, but ultimately finite. They could be destroyed if someone had the power and the will to do it. Valara had both. The entity dissolved, its essence scattering like ash in a wind that existed only in their shared perception. And as it died, Marcus felt something break in Valara, some final barrier that had been holding her back from truly feeling, truly connecting, truly living. She collapsed against him, her crystalline form solid but trembling, and for the first time in 3,000 years of Aureen history, one of her species wept. "It's gone," she whispered. "The corruption. I can feel where it was in my genetic structure. It was real, but it's gone now. You burned it out of me." "We burned it out," Marcus corrected gently. "Together." They stood together in the archive, surrounded by the evidence of what the Aureen had once been and what they might become again, holding each other while a galaxy's worth of lies crumbled around them. And Marcus realized that they had just done something that would change everything. They had proven that the severance could be broken. That touch between Aureen and humans was not only possible but powerful. That the corruption could be defeated if someone was brave enough to try. But they had also made themselves targets. The Council would never allow this knowledge to spread. They would hunt Valara to the ends of the galaxy, and they would kill anyone who stood beside her. Marcus should have been terrified. Instead, he found himself smiling. "What?" Valara asked, sensing his emotion through their connection. "I was just thinking. A few hours ago, I was a captain with a damaged ship and a crew to protect. Pretty straightforward job. Now I'm holding an alien doctor who just rewrote 3,000 years of history and killed a corruption monster with the power of human stubbornness." He looked down at her, his grey eyes bright with determination. "My life just got a lot more complicated." "You could still leave," she said quietly. "Return to your ship. Tell the Council I forced you to help me. They might believe it." "They might, but I'd know the truth." He brushed a strand of hair from his face with his free hand, the other still holding her. "Besides, Someone needs to help you bring down a corrupt government, save your species, and generally make sure you don't get yourself killed while doing it. Might as well be me." Valara laughed. Actual laughter, bright and genuine and shocked out of her by sheer absurdity. It was the first time Marcus had heard her make that sound, and he thought it might be the first time any Aureen had laughed in 3,000 years. Then the moment shattered as alarms began blaring throughout the archive. The council had found them. "Time to run again?" Marcus asked. "Time to run again," Valara confirmed. But as they fled deeper into the ancient station, their hands still clasped together, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't running away from anything. They were running towards something, toward a future where Aureen could touch again, toward a truth that would reshape the galaxy, toward each other, and he wouldn't have it any other way. The ancient corridors of Frontier Station Epsilon had become a maze of danger and desperation. Marcus kept Valara close as they navigated through sections of the station that hadn't seen maintenance in decades, following her instincts towards something she called the old docking bay, a launch facility that predated modern security systems and just might offer them a way off this station before the Council's forces trapped them completely. Behind them, the sound of pursuit grew steadily closer. Not just station security now, but Council enforcers, elite Aureen warriors trained specifically to handle threats to the Severance. Marcus had read about them in classified military briefings. They were efficient, ruthless, and utterly dedicated to preserving the order that had defined their species for 3 millennia. "How much further?" he asked, his breath coming harder now. Even with regular combat conditioning, running through a space station while holding hands with someone wasn't exactly standard training. 200 meters. Valara's crystalline form was still glowing from their encounter with the corruption entity, pulsing with combined power that seemed to grow stronger the longer they maintained contact. "The bay should be through the next bulkhead, but Marcus, there's something you need to know. Can it wait until we're not being hunted?" "No." She pulled them both to a stop in a junction of 3 corridors, her faceted eyes searching his face with an intensity that made his heart skip. "What happened in the archive, what we did together, it changed me on a fundamental level. I can feel the corruption's absence where it used to be dormant in my genetic structure, but I can also feel something new taking its place." "New how?" Valara placed her free hand against his chest, and Marcus felt a surge of sensation that went beyond physical touch. It was like she was reading him, understanding him, connecting with him in ways that transcended language or even thought. "I can sense your emotions now. Not just feel them vaguely, but understand them with perfect clarity. Your fear for your crew, your determination to protect me, your confusion about what's happening between us." She paused, her light flickering with something that looked like vulnerability, and something else. Something deeper that I don't have a name for because my species forgot how to feel it 3,000 years ago. Marcus knew what she meant. He could feel it too. That pull toward her that went beyond attraction or partnership or even friendship. It was recognition at a level that made no logical sense, like some part of his soul had been waiting his entire life to find her, and now that he had, the thought of separation was physically painful. "We can figure out what this means later," he said, though his hand tightened on hers instinctively. "Right now." Energy fire erupted from the corridor behind them, superheating the air and sending them both diving for cover behind a support pillar. Council enforcers poured into the junction, their crystalline forms armored with tactical enhancements that made them look like warriors from some ancient war, which Marcus supposed they essentially were. "Dr. Sin," the lead enforcer's voice resonated with authority and something else. Pity, perhaps. "You are corrupted beyond redemption. Surrender yourself and the human. The Council offers mercy in the form of swift termination, rather than prolonged cleansing." "How generous," Marcus muttered, assessing their tactical situation. 3 enforcers visible, probably more in reserve. No cover between their position and the next corridor. His chances of fighting through without weapons were essentially 0, but Valara wasn't defenseless. "Stay behind me," she said, her voice taking on a quality he hadn't heard before. Not cold and clinical like when they first met, but not fully emotional either. Something in between, controlled passion, focused intensity. "What I'm about to do will either save us or prove the Council right about corruption." Before Marcus could ask what she meant, Valara stepped out from behind the pillar with both hands raised. Energy exploded from her crystalline structure, but it wasn't the focused medical precision he had seen her use in the healing bay. This was raw power, barely controlled, pulsing with combined Aureen and human elements that created something entirely new. The enforcers fired, their weapons designed to disable crystalline nervous systems without causing permanent damage. But when their energy struck Valara's barrier, something impossible happened. The barrier didn't just absorb the attacks, it transformed them, converting hostile energy into healing light that washed back over the enforcers themselves. Marcus watched in awe as the warriors who had been trying to kill them suddenly collapsed, their crystalline forms pulsing with involuntary healing that forced their bodies into something like sleep. Non-lethal but completely effective. "How did you—" he started. "I don't know." Valara was staring at her hands like they belonged to a stranger. "I just felt what needed to happen, and it happened. Like the touch gave me access to abilities I never knew existed. Or maybe abilities that all Aureen once possessed before the severance locked them away." They ran past the sleeping enforcers, Marcus's mind racing almost as fast as his feet. If Valara could do that after just hours of contact, what could other Aureen do if they were freed from the severance? What had the Council stolen from an entire species by forcing them into isolation? The old docking bay appeared ahead, exactly where Valara had sensed it would be. Unlike the modern, sterile facilities Marcus was used to, this place looked like something from a museum. The bay doors were massive slabs of living crystal that had grown rather than been constructed, and the vessels docked within were ancient craft that predated anything in Confederacy records. "Those ships," Marcus said, approaching the nearest one with a mixture of professional assessment and raw wonder. "They're at least 4,000 years old. Will they even fly? They were designed by Aureen who understood touch, who built with connection in mind." Valara moved to what looked like a control console, her hands dancing across a crystalline interface that responded to her presence. "The technology isn't just mechanical, it's partially biological. It responds to intent as much as instruction." She placed both hands on the console, and throughout the bay, ancient systems began waking up. Lights flickered to life. Atmospheric processors hummed, and the nearest ship, a sleek vessel that looked like frozen music given physical form, opened its boarding ramp in silent invitation. "That's our ride," Valara said, turning back to Marcus. "But there's a problem. These ships were designed for pairs, bonded pairs. Aureen who were so deeply connected through touch that they could pilot as a single entity. I can feel the ship's systems. It won't respond to a single pilot, and it certainly won't respond to someone who isn't Aureen." Marcus felt understanding settle over him like a weight. Unless that pilot has a connection to an Aureen, a deep connection, the kind that comes from burning out ancient corruption together. It's dangerous. The kind of neural linking these ships require. It would merge our minds partially. You would feel what I feel. I would sense what you sense. There would be no privacy, no barriers between us. Then we'd better have some trust issues worked out fast. Marcus took her hand again, feeling that now familiar surge of connection. "Because I don't see any other options, and I really don't want to be here when more enforcers show up." Valara studied him for a long moment, and Marcus realized she was genuinely giving him a chance to back out, to choose safety over this insane path they were on together. But they both knew he wasn't going to take it. "All right," she said quietly. "But Marcus, when we link, when you're inside my mind, you're going to see things about me. Things I've never shared with anyone because my species doesn't share. My fears, my doubts, every moment of loneliness I've felt in 26 years of isolated existence. And you're going to see mine. Every time I've failed, every person I couldn't save, every night I've laid awake wondering if any of this matters." He smiled slightly. "We're going to be a mess together, but at least we won't be alone." They boarded the ancient vessel hand in hand, and Marcus felt the ship respond to their presence like a living thing greeting long-lost friends. The interior was beautiful in ways he couldn't quite articulate, all flowing lines and crystalline surfaces that seemed to shift between solid and liquid states. At the center of the bridge was a dual pilot station that looked more like a meditation chamber than any cockpit he had ever seen. "We need to sit facing each other," Valara explained, guiding him into position, "and maintain physical contact throughout the process. The ship will do the rest, but Marcus, once we start, there's no stopping until we break atmosphere. If you panic, if you try to pull away, I won't." He settled into the position, his knees touching hers, his hands clasped in hers. "I trust you, Valara, completely." He felt her emotional response to those words like a physical touch, surprise, gratitude, and something deeper that made his heart race. Then she activated the link and Marcus's entire world exploded into colors and sensations he had no context for. He was inside her mind, not observing it, but experiencing it. He felt what it meant to be Aureen, to exist as crystalline structure rather than flesh, to perceive the world through faceted senses that processed information in ways human neurology couldn't match. He felt her perfect memory stretching back through 26 years of existence, every moment preserved with flawless clarity, and he felt her loneliness so profound that it made his chest ache. 26 years without a single touch. 26 years of perfect competence and absolute isolation. 26 years of watching other species form bonds and connections while being taught that such things were weakness, corruption, death. But beneath that loneliness, Marcus found something else. Strength. Incredible, unshakable strength. Valara had endured what would have broken most beings, and she had not just survived, she had excelled. She had become the youngest chief medical officer in Confederacy history, not despite her isolation, but by channeling all of that locked-away emotional energy into pure competence. And now, with the barriers down, with a human consciousness merged with hers, she was discovering what she could have been if the severance had never existed. Meanwhile, Valara was experiencing Marcus's mind, and he felt her shock at the sheer chaos of human thought. Where Aureen minds were ordered and crystalline, human consciousness was storm and passion and contradiction. She felt his memories, not perfect like hers, but colored by emotion that transformed even mundane experiences into significance. She felt his losses. Parents dead in a colony raid when he was 12, a younger sister killed by pirates 3 years ago, friends lost in combat zones across the outer territories. She felt his guilt for surviving when others hadn't. His determination to make their sacrifices mean something. His bone-deep belief that protecting people was the only thing that gave life meaning. And she felt something else, something he had been trying not to examine too closely. From the moment he had seen her in that medical bay, something in him had recognized something in her. Two lonely people, one isolated by culture and one by circumstance, finding each other across the impossible divide of species and expectation. Is this what humans call love? Her thought echoed in their shared mindspace. I don't know, Marcus replied honestly. I've never felt anything like this before. But if it's not love, it's something close enough that I can't tell the difference. My species has no word for this feeling. We erased it from our language along with so much else. Then we'll make up a new word, after we survive the next 10 minutes. The ship was responding to their merged consciousness now, systems coming online that had been dormant for millennia. Marcus felt himself understanding the controls through Valara's knowledge, while she gained his piloting instincts and combat training. They were becoming something greater than the sum of their parts. Not human, not Aureen, but a hybrid consciousness that could navigate this ancient vessel as it had been designed to be flown. The bay doors were opening, revealing the star-filled void beyond, and Marcus could sense through their link that council ships were already moving to intercept them. Ready? Valara asked, her voice existing both in the physical world and in their shared mental space. Born ready, Marcus replied and launched them into space. The sensation of flying the ancient vessel was unlike anything Marcus had experienced in 10 years of military piloting. He wasn't giving commands to a ship, he was being the ship. His consciousness merged with its systems through Valara's crystalline connection. He could feel the solar winds, sense the gravitational pulls of nearby masses, and anticipate threats before they fully manifested. 3 council cruisers were indeed waiting for them, their weapons already charging. But the ancient vessel was faster than anything in the modern fleet, more maneuverable, more alive. Marcus dove and weaved through their fire patterns, with Valara's predictive analysis guiding him, while she in turn drew on his combat experience to anticipate enemy tactics. They're not trying to destroy us, Valara observed, her consciousness bright with alarm in their shared space. They're trying to force us towards something. Marcus felt it too, a subtle herding pattern that was pushing them away from the main shipping lanes and toward the edge of the system. And waiting there, its presence radiating malevolence even across the void, was something that made every warning system in the ship scream in protest. A void gate. Marcus had read about them in classified briefings, ancient structures predating the Confederacy by thousands of years, built by species long extinct or vanished. The gates could open passages through space-time, but they were unpredictable, dangerous, and according to some theories, potentially sentient. Most of them had been quarantined or destroyed, but this one was active, its surface rippling with energies that made his human perception flinch away in instinctive horror. "They're going to force us through," Valara said. "They can't kill me without risking the truth spreading, but if we disappear into a void gate, no one will ever know what happened to us." Marcus felt anger surge through their link, and they get to maintain their lie for another few thousand years. The Council cruisers intensified their attack, no longer trying to capture but to eliminate any trajectory, except one, straight into the gate. Energy fire boxed them in from 3 sides, gravitational mines closed off escape routes, and the ancient vessel, for all its power, couldn't fight an entire fleet alone. "Marcus," Valara's presence in his mind was steady, despite the fear they both felt. "I need you to trust me one more time. Always. Then don't fight the gate. Head straight for it." Every instinct Marcus had was screaming at him to avoid the swirling vortex of reality-breaking energy ahead. But he had meant what he said. He trusted her completely. So he pushed the ancient vessel to maximum speed and dove straight into the impossible. The void gate swallowed them, and for a moment that lasted both forever and no time at all, Marcus ceased to exist as anything recognizable. He was scattered across dimensions his human mind couldn't process, unmade and remade 1,000 times in the space between heartbeats. The only thing that kept his consciousness from simply dissolving into the chaos was Valara's presence. Solid, unshakable, crystalline clarity holding him together when physics itself was trying to tear him apart. Then they emerged on the other side, and Marcus found himself screaming, not in pain but in sheer sensory overload from experiencing things no human was designed to experience. "Breathe," Valara's voice anchored him, her consciousness wrapped around his like a protective shell. "You're intact, we're intact, and we're far beyond the Council's reach now." Marcus forced his breathing to steady, forced his scattered thoughts to coalesce into something resembling normal consciousness. Through the ship's sensors, he could see that they had emerged in a system he didn't recognize. No stars in Confederacy databases, no navigational markers, nothing but a single planet orbiting a dying red sun. "Where are we?" he managed. "Somewhere the Council didn't expect us to survive reaching." Valara's presence in his mind was tinged with something that felt like grim satisfaction. The old texts in the archive mentioned places like this. Refugees built by Aureen who fled the Severance in its early days, who refused to give up touch and connection. If any of them survived, if their descendants still exist, they would be here. Marcus focused on the planet below, using the ship's enhanced sensors. And there, impossibly, he detected signs of civilization. Crystalline structures that dwarfed anything in Confederacy space, energy signatures that suggested technology far beyond modern Aureen capabilities. And something else, a presence that felt almost like Valara's consciousness, but multiplied 1,000-fold. "There are Aureen down there," he whispered, "but they're different. They're what we were meant to be." Valara's joy flooded through their link. They're what we could all become again if the Severance were broken. They guided the ancient vessel toward the planet's surface, toward the unknown, toward a truth that had been hidden for 3,000 years. Marcus felt fear and hope warring within him, felt Valara experiencing the same conflict, and felt their merged consciousness finding strength in sharing both emotions. Whatever they found on this world, whether welcome or danger or something beyond imagination, they would face it together. One human captain who had chosen connection over duty, and one Aureen doctor who had chosen feeling over isolation. The ship descended through the atmosphere, and in the cities below, ancient peoples who had never forgotten the power of touch began to wake and take notice. The revolution against the Severance had truly begun. The planet's surface was like nothing Marcus had ever seen, and through his mental link with Valara, he experienced it through her crystalline senses as well, a double vision that made the impossible beauty even more overwhelming. Cities of living crystal grew from the landscape like music made solid, their spires reaching toward the rust-colored sky in patterns that suggested both careful design and organic growth. Between the structures, gardens bloomed with plants that were part vegetation and part mineral, their leaves catching the dim red sunlight and transforming it into cascades of bioluminescent color. But it was the people that made Marcus's heart race with wonder and fear. Aureen moved through the streets in pairs and groups, their crystalline forms touching, intertwining, merging and separating in fluid dances of connection that the Confederacy believed impossible. Some walked hand in hand like Valara and Marcus did. Others were so deeply linked that their separate forms became difficult to distinguish, their lights blending into new colors that seemed to express shared emotions. And everywhere, children, young Aureen, who had never known isolation, played with a joy that Marcus could feel radiating from them even at a distance. This was what Valara's species had lost. This was what the Council had stolen from them. "They're so beautiful," Valara whispered through their link, her consciousness flooded with emotions too complex for Marcus to fully process. Wonder, grief, anger, hope, all swirling together in a storm that threatened to overwhelm her careful control. "Easy," Marcus thought back, his human presence acting as an anchor in their shared mental space. "We knew this would be hard, but we're here now. We're safe. Are we?" Before Marcus could respond, the ancient vessel's sensors screamed a warning. They were being scanned by technology far more sophisticated than anything in Confederacy space, examined and assessed by intelligences that made even Valara's brilliant mind seem simple by comparison. Then a voice resonated through their ship's communication system, not spoken in any physical sense, but transmitted directly into their linked consciousness. It was like hearing a choir of thousands singing in perfect harmony, each voice distinct, yet blended into a whole that transcended individual identity. "Welcome, severed child. Welcome, human who dares to touch. We have been waiting for you." The ship's controls were gently but firmly overridden by external forces. Marcus felt the ancient vessel being guided toward a landing platform near the largest crystalline structure in the city, a tower that seemed to reach all the way to the upper atmosphere, its surface pulsing with light that created patterns of staggering complexity. "Should I fight it?" Marcus asked Valara through their link. "No. If they wanted to destroy us, we would already be dead. This is an invitation." She paused, her consciousness flickering with uncertainty. "Or a judgment." They landed on a platform that adjusted its surface to perfectly accommodate their vessel, and Marcus felt the ship's systems begin to power down in response to some unspoken communication. Whatever happened next, they would face it without the protection of ancient technology. "Ready to meet your people's ancestors?" Marcus asked, trying to inject some humor into a situation that felt increasingly surreal. "They're not my people anymore," Valara replied softly. "The moment I was touched, the moment I chose you over the severance, I became something else, something in between. Then we'll be in between together." They broke their neural link reluctantly, both of them gasping slightly as their consciousness separated back into individual identities. Marcus felt suddenly alone in his own mind, the absence of Valara's presence, like losing a limb he hadn't known he possessed. From the way she clutched his hand, he suspected she felt the same way. The boarding ramp extended, revealing a welcoming committee that made Marcus instinctively assess for threats, even as his rational mind knew that if these beings wanted them dead, sophisticated tactics would be unnecessary. 3 Aureen stood waiting, but they were unlike any Marcus had seen in Confederacy space. These were ancient, not in the sense of chronological age, but in the weight of accumulated experience visible in every facet of their crystalline forms. Their structures were more complex than Valara's, layers of different crystalline growths suggesting centuries or millennia of connection and shared consciousness, and they were touching each other, their forms interlinked at hands and shoulders, sharing light in patterns that created something greater than 3 separate beings. The central figure stepped forward, or perhaps all 3 moved as one. It was difficult to tell where one consciousness ended and another began. When it spoke, the voice resonated not just in the air but in Marcus's bones, in Valara's crystalline structure, in the very platform beneath their feet. "I am Keeper Meridian. We are Keeper Meridian. The distinction ceases to matter after sufficient connection." The ancient Aureen's faceted eyes studied them with an intensity that felt like being unmade and examined at the molecular level. "You carry corruption within you, severed child. We can sense it dormant in your genetic structure, the same poison that forced our ancestors to flee 3,000 years ago." Valara's hand tightened on Marcus's, but her voice remained steady. "I carry it no longer. The human and I destroyed it together in the archive. I felt it burn away when our connection reached sufficient depth." All 3 of the linked Aureen reacted to that statement with what Marcus could only interpret as shock. Their combined light flickered, and for just a moment he saw something in their expressions that looked almost like fear. "That is not possible," Keeper Meridian said, their combined voice losing some of its harmonic perfection. "The corruption cannot be destroyed. It is woven into Aureen genetic structure at a fundamental level. We fled here because we learned to live with it, to contain it through constant connection that prevents it from activating. But destroy it. No Aureen has that power. She does now, Marcus said, surprising himself by speaking up when addressing beings who could probably unmake him with a thought. Because she's not just Aureen anymore. When we merged our consciousness to fly the ancient vessel, something changed. She took parts of my humanity into herself, my emotions, my irrationality, my stubborn human belief that impossible just means nobody's tried hard enough yet. And together we did what neither species could do alone. The three keepers exchanged glances that somehow conveyed entire conversations in an instant. Then they approached, moving with fluid grace that made them seem to flow rather than walk. They reached toward Valara, and Marcus felt her flinch instinctively before forcing herself to remain still. When the ancient Aureen touched her, placing crystalline hands against her structure, in an examination that was equal parts medical scan and violation of privacy, Marcus felt Valara's consciousness flood with sensations she had no framework to process. These beings weren't just touching her surface, they were reading her history, her genetic code, her very essence with a thoroughness that made modern medical scanning look like guesswork. How extraordinary, Keeper Meridian breathed after a moment that felt like hours. The corruption is truly gone, not suppressed, not contained, destroyed, and in its place, they pulled back, their combined consciousness radiating something that felt like awe, tinged with terror. In its place, you have created something new, a hybrid structure that is part Aureen clarity, part human chaos. You are the first of a new species. That's not possible, Valara said, her voice shaking slightly. I'm still Aureen, You are Aureen who has been permanently altered by deep connection to a human consciousness. The keepers turned their attention to Marcus, and he forced himself not to step back from the weight of their combined regard. And you, human. You are unchanged physically, but your consciousness has been touched by crystalline clarity. You think with greater precision than you did before. You sense emotions with accuracy your species should not possess. You are also changed. Marcus realized with a shock that they were right. Ever since breaking the neural link with Valara, his thoughts had been clearer, more organized. He could sense the emotional states of the keepers with a precision that had nothing to do with body language or tone of voice. The connection had changed him too. What does this mean? Valara asked, her scientific mind already racing through implications. If contact between Aureen and humans can create permanent beneficial changes, if it can destroy the corruption rather than activate it, then everything the Council has built over 3,000 years is a lie, Keeper Meridian finished. Not just a mistake or a necessary sacrifice, but an active falsehood, maintained to preserve their power. And if this knowledge were to spread, revolution, Marcus said bluntly, galaxy-wide revolution, because it's not just Aureen who would be affected. Every species in the Confederacy has bought into the severance narrative. They've structured their societies around respecting Aureen isolation. If they learned it was all unnecessary, the political ramifications would be catastrophic. Keeper Meridian gestured toward the city around them. Come, walk with us. There is much you need to understand about what you have become and what you might accomplish. But I warn you both, the path ahead is dangerous beyond anything you have yet experienced. The Council will not simply hunt you. They will seek to erase all evidence of your existence and spread lies to discredit any who speak of you. They descended from the landing platform into the city proper, and Marcus felt his human sense of wonder warring with his tactical assessment of surroundings. Every street was filled with connected Aureen, their forms touching and merging in ways that created art and architecture and living community. Children played games that involved intricate dances of shared consciousness. Elders sat in meditation circles where their combined light created patterns of beauty that brought tears to Marcus's eyes. This was what a civilization looked like when it was built on connection instead of isolation. And the Confederacy had spent 3,000 years making sure most Aureen never knew it existed. How many of you are there? Valara asked, her consciousness through her maintained grip on Marcus's hand, radiating a hunger for knowledge that he found both admirable and slightly alarming. 17 million souls across 3 colonies in this system, Keeper Meridian replied, descendants of the 50,000 who fled rather than accept the severance. We have grown slowly, carefully, always hiding from Council scouts and maintaining absolute communications silence. As far as official Confederacy records show, this system is dead. hostile to life, devoid of resources, not worth investigating. And you've maintained that deception for 3 millennia? Marcus felt a surge of respect for that level of operational security. That's impressive. That is survival. The Keeper's voice grew darker. You must understand. The Council does not simply believe in the Severance. They have become the Severance. Their entire identity, their authority, their purpose for existing, all depend on maintaining isolation. When refugees fled here in the early years, the Council sent warships. They committed what you would call genocide to prevent anyone from learning that Aureen could survive without isolation. Valara stopped walking, her crystalline form flickering with distress. They killed their own people, for the crime of touching. They killed 73 million Aureen in the 1st century after the Severance was established, Keeper Meridian said flatly. Entire colonies that refused to accept isolation were sterilized from orbit. Individual families who maintained connection were hunted down and executed. By the 2nd century, most Aureen had learned to obey. By the 3rd, they had forgotten that any other way had ever existed. The Council didn't just enforce the Severance. They rewrote history to make it seem inevitable, natural, the only possible response to the corruption. Marcus felt rage building in his chest, felt Valara's answering fury through their maintained physical contact. That's not governance, that's tyranny backed by mass murder. Yes, Keeper Meridian led them to what appeared to be a memorial, a vast crystalline wall covered in names, millions upon millions of them. These are the ones we know of, the ones who died because they refused to stop touching, the ones the Council murdered to maintain their lie. And this is why we have remained hidden, rather than trying to spread the truth, because we knew that any revelation would result in our complete annihilation. But now something has changed, Valara said slowly, her brilliant mind working through the implications. We changed it, by proving that the corruption can be destroyed rather than just contained, by showing that human-Aureen connection creates something stronger than either species alone. Precisely. Keeper Meridian turned to face them fully. You are proof that the Severance is not just unnecessary, but actively harmful, that Aureen are meant to connect, are designed for it at a fundamental level. And if you can return to Confederacy space, if you can spread this truth, if you can inspire others to touch, despite the Council's prohibitions, the Severance falls, Marcus finished, and billions of Aureen discover they've been living in a prison their entire lives. But the Council won't allow it, Valara said. They'll kill us before we can spread the truth. They'll discredit us, call us corrupted, say we're speaking lies. Who would believe a fugitive doctor and a human captain over 3,000 years of established authority? Keeper Meridian's expression shifted into something that might have been a smile if Aureen facial structure worked that way. Which is why you will not go alone, and why you will bring more than just words. They had reached the base of the massive tower Marcus had noticed during their landing. Up close it was even more impressive, a structure that seemed to exist partially in dimensions his human perception couldn't fully process, and flowing through its crystalline walls like blood through veins, Marcus could see data, information, knowledge stored in forms that made modern computer systems look like children's toys. This is the true archive, Keeper Meridian explained. Everything the Council tried to destroy, we preserved. Complete historical records of Aureen civilization before the Severance. Medical data proving that connection enhances rather than corrupts. Genetic analyses showing how the corruption actually works and how it can be defeated. Even recordings of the Council's early atrocities preserved by refugees who escaped their purges. Valara's consciousness lit up with desperate hope. If we could bring this information back to Confederacy space, if we could show the people what their Council has hidden, they would have no choice but to listen, Marcus agreed. Evidence beats rhetoric every time. But how do we transport that much data? And how do we get it to people who will actually use it rather than suppress it? You are thinking too small, human. Keeper Meridian placed a crystalline hand on his shoulder, and Marcus felt the ancient consciousness touch his own, with a gentleness that made his earlier fear seem absurd. We are not offering you data to carry home. We are offering you an army. The Keeper gestured toward the city around them, toward the millions of connected Aureen living lives of joy and purpose that their severed cousins couldn't imagine. For 3,000 years, we have hidden. We have watched the Confederacy spiral deeper into the Council's lies, watched billions of our species' cousins live and die without knowing the simple pleasure of touch. We have remained silent because we feared annihilation. But now the situation has changed. Another voice spoke, one of the other linked beings in the Keeper triad. You have shown us that the corruption can be destroyed. That means our descendants will not need to maintain eternal connection to prevent its activation. That means we can spread beyond this hiding place without condemning future generations to the same burden we carry. We have been waiting, the third voice added, waiting for a sign that the time had come to act, waiting for someone brave enough or foolish enough to challenge the severance and survive. And here you stand, one severed child who chose connection over safety, and one human who chose her over his entire career. Keeper Meridian's combined consciousness pressed against Marcus and Valara with the weight of decision. We have ships, ancient vessels like the one you flew, but larger, more powerful. We have warriors who have trained for centuries in combat techniques the Confederacy forgot. We have knowledge that will shake the foundations of galactic society, and we have 17 million people who are tired of hiding while their species' cousins suffer in isolation. You're talking about war, Marcus said, his military training making him automatically assess the strategic implications. The Council controls the Confederacy's largest fleet. They have resources, infrastructure, political power across 100 systems. Even with superior technology, 17 million against trillions. We are not talking about conquest, Keeper Meridian corrected gently. We are talking about liberation. We will not destroy the Council with weapons. We will destroy it with truth. We will go to every Aureen colony, every station, every settlement, and we will show them what they have lost. We will touch them one by one if necessary, and we will help them burn away the corruption that keeps them enslaved to fear. And once they experience true connection, they'll never accept isolation again, Valara finished, her voice full of wonder and terror. You'll start a revolution not through violence, but through demonstration, by showing every Aureen what their life could be like if the severance ended. Exactly. Keeper Meridian's satisfaction was palpable, but such a revolution needs symbols. It needs proof that severed Aureen can be healed. It needs heroes who have already walked the path from isolation to connection and survived. Marcus felt understanding settle over him like a heavy cloak. You want us to lead this, to be the faces of your revolution. We want you to be what you already are. Proof that the severance is a lie. Proof that connection makes us stronger. Proof that even the deepest corruption can be overcome if we are willing to face it together. Keeper Meridian looked between them. You do not need to decide now. Rest. Recover from your journey. Learn about our society. And then choose. Will you return to the Confederacy alone as fugitives carrying a message few will believe? Or will you return with an army at your back ready to liberate billions from a prison they don't even know they're in? Marcus looked at Valara, felt her consciousness through their maintained grip, radiating uncertainty and hope in equal measure. This was bigger than both of them. This was galactic history being rewritten. This was revolution on a scale that made military campaigns look like small skirmishes. This was terrifying and necessary and right. We need time, Valara said carefully. Time to understand what we would be starting. Time to count the cost. Of course. Keeper Meridian gestured toward a nearby structure that glowed with welcoming light. Accommodations have been prepared. Rest, heal, connect with each other without fear of pursuit. And when you are ready, we will speak again. They were guided to living quarters that were simultaneously alien and comforting, crystalline chambers that adjusted their internal environment to accommodate both Aureen and human needs. As the door sealed behind them, finally giving them privacy after hours of running and revelation, Marcus felt the adrenaline that had been sustaining him begin to fade. I think I need to sit down before I fall down, he admitted, settling onto a surface that shifted to support him perfectly. Valara joined him immediately, her crystalline form pressed against his side in a way that would have been scandalous on any Confederacy station. Through their contact, he felt her processing everything that had happened, the archive, the corruption's destruction, the flight through the void gate, the discovery of this hidden world, the offer to lead a revolution. It's too much, she said quietly. A day ago, I was a doctor. I had a clear role, clear rules, clear expectations. Now I'm supposed to be a revolutionary, a symbol, the face of a movement that will reshape my entire species. You don't have to be. Marcus wrapped his arm around her, pulling her closer. We could stay here, build a life in this city. You could practice medicine among people who wouldn't judge you for being touched. I don't know, learn to farm glowing vegetables or something. We could be happy. He felt her amusement through their contact, followed quickly by sadness. Could we? Knowing that billions of Aureen are still living in isolation because they believe the Council's lies? Knowing that we have the power to free them and chose our own comfort instead? Probably not, Marcus admitted, but I had to offer. Because what Keeper Meridian is proposing, Valara, this isn't going to be some clean, bloodless revolution. The Council will fight back. They'll use propaganda, military force, political maneuvering, maybe even biological weapons. People will die. Lots of them, and you and I will be responsible for starting it. People are already dying, Valara replied. Dying of loneliness. Dying without ever knowing the simple joy of touch. Dying because the Council has convinced them that isolation is virtue. She turned to look at him, her faceted eyes reflecting his face in 1,000 crystalline fragments. I became a doctor because I wanted to heal people. But how do you heal a wound that an entire civilization has been taught to believe isn't a wound at all? Marcus had no answer to that. Instead, he just held her, feeling her presence in his mind and his arms. This impossible being who had somehow become the center of his universe in less than a day. Whatever we decide, he said finally, we decide together. No martyrdom, no sacrificing yourself for the greater good. We're in this as partners, or not at all. Partners, Valara repeated, testing the word. My species has no concept for that kind of equality. Aureen relationships are about hierarchy and structure, but partnership, choosing each other as equals, is very human, Marcus finished. One of the better things my species invented, along with coffee, terrible puns, and the stubborn belief that impossible just means nobody's tried hard enough yet. Valara laughed, that bright sound that still seemed to surprise her every time it emerged. Then she did something that made Marcus's breath catch. She reached up with her crystalline hand and gently touched his face, her faceted fingers tracing his features with an expression of wonder that needed no translation. I want to try something, she said softly. Something I saw Aureen doing in the city, but I need you to trust me completely. Always. Valara closed her eyes, an entirely human gesture that she must have picked up from him, and Marcus felt her consciousness reach toward his. Not the forced neural link of the ancient ship, but something gentler, more intimate, an invitation rather than a necessity. He accepted, and their minds merged again. But this time there was no ship to pilot, no crisis to navigate, no external pressure driving the connection. It was just them, two beings learning to share space in each other's consciousness, discovering what partnership meant when your thoughts could touch as easily as your hands. Marcus experienced Valara's wonder at physical sensation, the texture of his skin under her fingers, the warmth of his body beside hers, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Things she had gone 26 years without knowing existed, now becoming as essential to her as breath. And Valara experienced his fierce protectiveness toward her, his determination to keep her safe, even at the cost of his own life, and beneath that, something deeper, recognition. The human concept called love, which his species had written millions of words about and still couldn't fully define, but which felt exactly like this, like finding someone and realizing that whatever came before was just preparation for this moment. Is this what it feels like for all bonded Aureen? Marcus wondered through their link. I don't know, Valara admitted, but I hope so. I hope every being in the universe gets to feel this at least once. This certainty that you're not alone, that another consciousness exists that chooses to share space with yours, not out of obligation, but out of genuine desire. They held each other through the night cycle, their minds and bodies intertwined, while outside their chamber, a hidden civilization prepared for war. And somewhere in the depths of Confederacy space, the Council was gathering its forces, mobilizing its fleets and preparing to erase all evidence that Dr. Valara Sin and Captain Marcus Webb had ever existed. The revolution hadn't started yet, but both sides knew it was coming, and the galaxy would never be the same. Marcus woke to the sensation of crystalline fingers tracing patterns on his chest, and for a disorienting moment, he couldn't remember where he was. Then awareness flooded back, the hidden world, the revolution, the impossible choice they faced. He opened his eyes to find Valara watching him with an expression that was becoming increasingly easy to read despite her alien features. You were dreaming, she said softly. I could feel it through our connection even while you slept. Your sister. The pirates who killed her. Marcus tensed instinctively, old grief rising like bile in his throat. I didn't know you could sense that. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to intrude. Valara's hand stilled on his chest. Your species dreams in ways mine doesn't. We process memories during rest cycles, but not with the emotional intensity you do. It's beautiful, in a painful way, the way your unconscious mind tries to work through trauma by replaying it. Beautiful isn't the word I'd use. Marcus sat up, running a hand through his disheveled hair. How long was I out? 6 hours. I've been awake for most of it, exploring our quarters and watching the city through the viewport. She gestured toward the transparent wall that looked out over the crystalline metropolis. Marcus, they live differently here, not just the touching, everything. The way they raise children communally, the way they make decisions through merged consciousness, the way they create art by sharing thoughts until beauty emerges. It's what Aureen's civilization could have been if the severance had never happened. Marcus joined her at the viewport, taking her hand automatically. Through their contact, he felt her emotions, awe mixed with grief, hope tangled with guilt. You're thinking about all the Aureen who will never know this exists unless we act. Billions of them, Marcus. Billions of people living partial lives because they've been taught that connection is death. And I could change that. We could change that. But at what cost? Before Marcus could respond, a chime announced visitors. Keeper Meridian entered, but this time they were accompanied by others, Aureen of various ages, their forms ranging from the deep complexity of ancient beings to the brighter simplicity of those perhaps only a few decades old. And there were children, young crystalline beings who looked at Marcus with undisguised curiosity. I thought you should meet some of our people, Keeper Meridian explained. Theory and strategy are important, but revolution is ultimately about individuals. These are the ones who will be putting their lives at risk if you choose to lead us back to Confederacy space. An elder Aureen stepped forward, their form so old and complex that Marcus couldn't guess their age. I am Scholar Vex. I was born in Confederacy space 70 years before the severance was fully established. I remember what it was like when Aureen was still learning to fear touch, when families were being torn apart by the Council's new laws. I escaped here with my bonded partners. They gestured to 2 other ancient Aureen, who stood close enough that their crystalline structures merged at the edges. And we have spent 3,000 years preserving the knowledge of what we lost. If you lead this revolution, Scholar Sin, I will be among the first to return. I want to die knowing that future generations will not have to hide as we did. A younger Aureen spoke next, perhaps 50 years old by Marcus's estimation. I am Warrior Kess. I have trained my entire life for combat that I hoped would never come. But if the choice is between hiding forever and fighting for our species' freedom, I choose to fight. Give us a reason to act, and we will follow you into darkness itself. Then one of the children stepped forward, a small crystalline being that couldn't have been more than 10 years old, their form still bright with the simplicity of youth. They looked up at Valara with faceted eyes full of trust that made Marcus's chest ache. My name is Light Dancer, the child said in a voice like wind chimes. My mothers say that children in Confederacy space grow up alone, that they never know what it feels like to merge consciousness with parents who love them, or to play touching games with other younglings, or to be part of something bigger than themselves. I don't understand how anyone could live that way. It sounds so lonely it makes my light flicker. Will you help them? Will you teach them how to touch? Valara made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. She knelt down to the child's level, placing a gentle hand on their small crystalline form. I will try, little one. I can't promise I'll succeed, but I will try. The child beamed, an expression that involved their entire structure glowing brighter, and then did something that made Marcus's heart nearly stop. They wrapped their small arms around Valara in a gesture of pure, uncomplicated affection that transcended species boundaries. A hug. This child who had never known the severance was teaching a doctor raised in isolation how to accept comfort. Through their maintained connection, Marcus felt Valara's emotional response, a tsunami of feelings she didn't have names for, crashing through defenses she no longer needed. She had gone her entire life without this, without the simple knowledge that she could be held not for medical necessity or sexual purpose, but just because another being cared about her well-being. When Light Dancer finally pulled away and ran back to their mothers, Valara stood slowly, her crystalline form trembling. She turned to Keeper Meridian with an expression of absolute certainty. I need to understand what I'm committing to, she said, her voice steady despite the storm Marcus could feel raging inside her. If we do this, If we lead this revolution, what exactly are you proposing? What's the actual plan? Keeper Meridian gestured for everyone to sit, and the chamber's floor adjusted itself to create seating that accommodated both crystalline and flesh-based anatomies. The plan is simple in concept but complex in execution. We have 300 ships capable of reaching Confederacy space. Each can carry between 100 and 1,000 passengers, depending on whether we prioritize comfort or numbers. That gives us the capacity to transport anywhere from 30,000 to 300,000 of our people. 300,000 against trillions, Marcus said, his tactical mind automatically assessing the numbers. Even with superior technology. We are not planning to fight battles, Warrior Kess interrupted. At least not primarily. Our strategy is infiltration, not invasion. We will go to Aureen colonies quietly, in small groups. We will touch the isolated ones, help them burn away the corruption as you did, and then let them choose. Return to the Severance and report us to the Council, or join our cause and help liberate others. You're gambling that most will choose liberation, Valara said slowly. That once they experience connection, they won't want to give it up. It's not a gamble. It's a certainty. Scholar Vex's ancient voice carried absolute conviction. I have studied 3,000 years of suppressed history. Every time an isolated Aureen has been accidentally touched and survived the corruption, every single time they have refused to return to isolation. The Council has always had to kill them to maintain the severance, because once you know what connection feels like, isolation becomes unbearable. Your own experience proves this, does it not? Valara's hand tightened on Marcus's. Yes, I could never go back to what I was before. Even if Marcus disappeared tomorrow, even if I lost everything, I would still choose this. I would still choose feeling. Then imagine 17 million of us spreading through Confederacy space, Keeper Meridian continued, touching Aureen wherever we find them, creating thousands, then millions of newly awakened beings who understand what they've been denied. The Council can hunt down individual fugitives, but they cannot stop a movement. They cannot kill billions of their own people without revealing themselves as the tyrants they are. But they'll try, Marcus pointed out. They'll spin it as corruption spreading. They'll quarantine entire colonies, claiming disease. They'll turn the other Confederacy species against you, warning them that touching Aureen is dangerous. They'll use every political and military tool at their disposal. Yes, Keeper Meridian agreed calmly, which is why we need you. Dr. Sin, you are severed. You come from their world, speak their language, understand their fears. But you have been transformed by connection, and you carry proof that the corruption can be destroyed. You are living evidence that the Council's entire justification for the severance is false. And me? Marcus asked. What's my role in this besides being the human who touched her? You represent possibility, Scholar Vex said. The Council has spent 3,000 years teaching Aureen that other species are dangerous, that connection with non-Aureen is the ultimate corruption. But here you stand, human and unchanged, healthy and helpful, having merged consciousness with an Aureen and emerged stronger rather than weaker. You prove that the walls the Council built don't just isolate Aureen from each other, they isolate us from the entire galaxy. You prove that we can be part of the Confederacy as full participants rather than distant observers. A tactical display appeared in the center of their circle, projected by technology Marcus couldn't quite comprehend. It showed Confederacy space with hundreds of Aureen colonies marked in blue. We have identified key locations, Warrior Kess explained. Colonies where we have reason to believe the population is already questioning the severance. Stations where accidental touches have occurred and been covered up. Research facilities where scientists are discovering discrepancies in the Council's historical records. These are the places we will go first. Soft targets, Marcus said, recognizing the strategy. Build momentum with populations already inclined to listen, then use their conversion as evidence to convince harder targets. Exactly. And while we work at the grassroots level, you two will work at the top. Keeper Meridian manipulated the display, highlighting a location that made Marcus's blood run cold. The Council's primary seat of power, a massive station orbiting the Aureen homeworld itself. You will go to the capital. You will demand an audience with the full Council, and you will challenge them publicly to defend their lies. That's suicide, Marcus said flatly. They'll kill us the moment we arrive. They'll try, Keeper Meridian agreed, but they will also have to do it publicly, in front of other Confederacy ambassadors and dignitaries. And we will make sure your story, your real story, complete with evidence from the true archive, is broadcast to every corner of Confederacy space before you even arrive. The Council will face a choice: allow you to speak and risk their lies being exposed, or silence you and confirm that they're tyrants willing to murder anyone who questions them. So we're bait, Valara said, her voice hollow. We're the distraction that keeps the Council focused on us, while your people spread through their territories. You're the spark, Keeper Meridian corrected gently, the moment that forces everyone to choose sides. Revolution needs symbols, needs heroes, needs someone willing to stand in front of the enemy and say no more. Are you willing to be that symbol? Marcus looked at Valara, felt her consciousness through their connection, wrestling with the weight of decision. This wasn't just about them anymore. This was about billions of Aureen living in isolation, about children like Light Dancer, who would either grow up free or grow up learning to fear their own nature, about the future of an entire species. I need to talk to my crew, Marcus said abruptly. They followed me to that medical station. They trusted me to make good calls. I can't lead a revolution without at least telling them what I'm planning. Keeper Meridian nodded. We anticipated that. Your vessel is intact and your crew has been brought here. They are currently in medical evaluation. 3 of them still needed significant healing that Dr. Sin's initial treatment began but did not complete. Would you like to see them? Relief flooded through Marcus. In the chaos of the last day, he had barely had time to think about his people beyond gratitude that they survived. Yes. Absolutely yes. I'll go with you, Valara said immediately. I should check on my patients anyway. They were led through the crystalline city to a medical facility that made Frontier Station Epsilon look primitive by comparison. Here, Aureen healers worked in teams. Their consciousness merged as they treated patients with combined power that individual practitioners could never match. And in a private ward, Marcus found his crew. Lieutenant Sarah Chen was the first to see him. His second-in-command sat up from a medical bed, her injured arm now fully healed and mobile. Her dark eyes went wide as she took in Marcus's appearance, still wearing his torn uniform, holding hands with a glowing alien doctor, looking like he hadn't slept in a week despite the rest he'd just had. Captain? Her voice carried a mix of relief and confusion. What the hell is going on? 1 minute we're on a frontier station, the next we're being loaded onto some ancient alien ship and told we're going somewhere safe. Where are we? And why is the doctor glowing? Marcus felt 7 pairs of eyes turned toward him, his entire surviving crew, the people who had trusted him to lead them through combat zones and diplomatic nightmares and everything in between. How did he explain this? How did he tell them that he had accidentally started a revolution and was now asking them to be part of it? It's complicated, he started, then shook his head. No, you all deserve the truth, the full truth. He told them everything. The touch that should have destroyed Valara but didn't. The archive and the corruption. The Council's lies and genocides. The hidden world and the revolution being planned. He told them about the choice he and Valara faced. Lead a movement that could free billions or walk away and let the Severance continue forever. When he finished, silence filled the medical bay. Then Petty Officer James Morrison, a young man who Marcus had once pulled from a burning ship, spoke up with a grin that was pure human audacity. So, what you're saying, Captain, is that you accidentally started a galactic revolution by holding hands with a pretty doctor. Despite everything, Marcus laughed. That's one way to put it. And now you're asking if we want to help overthrow a 3,000-year-old tyranny, fight against impossible odds, and probably die in the process. I'm not asking anything. You've all done enough. You can stay here, safe, while... With all due respect, sir, shut up. Chen stood, moving to face him directly. You pulled me out of a combat zone when you could have left me behind. You talked down that Kralix warlord instead of starting a war that would have killed thousands. You've spent 3 years putting our lives ahead of your own career, your safety, your everything. So if you're going to do something stupid and noble like leading a revolution, then we're coming with you. Because that's what crews do. We stick together. One by one, the others stood. Morrison with his easy grin. Ensign Park with her quiet determination. Chief Engineer Rodriguez, who had kept their dying ship flying. All of them choosing to follow him into something that made combat look safe by comparison. Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. He didn't bother hiding. You understand that this isn't a military operation. We won't have backup. We won't have official sanction. If we're captured, if we die, the Confederacy will disavow us. We'll be rebels, terrorists, threats to galactic stability. Or heroes who freed billions of people from a prison they didn't know they were in, Park said quietly. Seems like a risk worth taking. Through his connection with Valara, Marcus felt her wonder at this display of human loyalty. Her species had words for duty and obligation, but this willingness to throw away safety for no reason except that your captain needed you, that was something the Severance had stolen from them millennia ago. "All right then," Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion. "We do this together, all of us." They spent the next several hours planning. Keeper Meridian and the other elders joined them, bringing tactical displays and strategic assessments. Marcus's crew contributed their own military experience. Chen knew Confederacy fleet movements. Rodriguez understood their communication protocols. Morrison had spent time undercover in pirate organizations and knew how to move through hostile territory undetected, and Valara provided the medical and scientific expertise that would be crucial to their mission. She could teach other Aureen healers how to destroy the corruption in newly touched individuals. She could document the process, create protocols, turn what had happened to her into a repeatable procedure that would prove the severance was unnecessary. As the plan took shape, Marcus felt the pieces falling into place with a rightness that transcended logic. This was what he had been preparing for his entire life, even when he didn't know it. Every leadership decision, every tactical challenge, every moment of choosing people over protocol, it had all been leading to this. "We'll need a ship," Chen said, studying the tactical displays. "Something that can get us to the capital without being detected or destroyed. Our frigate is too damaged, too recognizable." "We'll give you one of the ancient vessels," Keeper Meridian said. "Larger than the one you arrived in, designed to carry a full crew plus cargo. It will require Dr. Sin and Captain Webb to pilot it through neural link, but the rest of your crew can manage weapons, shields, and support systems." "When do we leave?" Marcus asked. "Tomorrow. The fleet will begin deploying to target colonies within the week, but you need to arrive at the capital first. Your challenge to the Council must be public, must be documented, must happen before they can spin the narrative to their advantage." Keeper Meridian's ancient gaze swept over all of them. "You understand that this may be a one-way journey, that even if you succeed in exposing the Council's lies, they may kill you for it." "We understand," Marcus said, and felt his crew's agreement through their shared determination. "But some things are worth dying for. Freedom, truth, the right to touch another person without being murdered for it. This qualifies." Valara squeezed his hand, and through their connection, he felt her making peace with what they were about to do. "I became a doctor to heal people," she said softly. "But sometimes the sickness isn't in individual bodies. Sometimes it's in entire civilizations, and the only way to heal that is to cut out the corruption at its source." "Then that's what we'll do," Marcus replied. "Together." That night, as the hidden world prepared for revolution and Marcus's crew made ready for a mission that would determine the fate of billions, Marcus and Valara stood at the viewport of their quarters and looked out at the crystalline city below. Aureen moved through the streets in patterns of light and connection, living the life that should have been available to all of their species. "No regrets?" Marcus asked quietly. "None," Valara replied. "Even if we fail, even if the Council kills us and buries the truth again, at least we tried, at least we touched, at least we proved that connection was possible." She turned to face him, her crystalline structure reflecting his face in 1,000 fragments. "And at least I found you, even if it was only for a few days. At least I knew what it felt like to be chosen, to be cherished, to be part of something bigger than myself." Marcus pulled her close, resting his forehead against her crystalline one in a gesture that was becoming as natural as breathing. "When this is over, if we survive, I want to see what our future looks like. You and me, exploring a galaxy where Aureen can touch freely, maybe settling somewhere quiet, maybe continuing to be idiots who start revolutions. I don't know, but I want to find out together." "That sounds perfect," Valara whispered. "Absolutely perfect." They held each other as night fell over the hidden world, two beings from different species who had found each other across impossible odds and chosen to fight for a future where connection was not just possible, but celebrated. Tomorrow, they would leave this sanctuary. Tomorrow, they would challenge a tyranny 3,000 years in the making. Tomorrow, they would become the spark that would either burn away the severance or be snuffed out by those who feared change more than they valued truth. But tonight, they simply held each other and dreamed of a galaxy where no one ever had to live in isolation again. The revolution was coming, and nothing would ever be the same. The ship they called Breaking Dawn was a masterpiece of ancient Aureen engineering. 400 meters of living crystal that responded to thought as readily as to touch, weapons systems that had been designed before the Confederacy even existed, and shields that could bend space-time itself to deflect incoming fire. Standing on its bridge, Marcus felt the vessel's consciousness reaching toward him and Valara, eager for the neural link that would bring it fully to life. "It's beautiful," Lieutenant Chen said, her hands moving across crystalline controls that shifted configuration based on her touch. "And terrifying. Sir, if the Council has anything like this, they don't." Keeper Meridian stood at the bridge entrance, their ancient form glowing with satisfaction. The Council destroyed most of the old vessels when they established the Severance. They claimed it was about efficiency, about moving toward modern standardized technology. But the real reason was that ships like this required connection to pilot. They required touch, and they couldn't allow that. Marcus watched his crew settling into their stations. Rodriguez was in engineering, already having philosophical conversations with the ship's systems that seemed to respond to him like a living thing. Morrison and Park were at tactical, studying weapons configurations that made standard Confederacy armaments look like children's toys. And Chen was at communications, preparing to broadcast the message that would spark a revolution. "The transmission is ready," Chen reported. "Complete historical records from the True Archive, video documentation of Dr. Sin destroying the corruption entity, genetic analysis proving that the severance is unnecessary, even recordings of the Council's early genocides pulled from refugee testimonies. It's all encoded in a format that can't be altered or suppressed, set to broadcast simultaneously to every major news network, every government database, every public communication channel in Confederacy space. Once we send this, there's no going back," Valara said quietly. She stood beside Marcus at the pilot station, their hands already linked in preparation for the neural merge. "The Council will know we're coming. They'll have time to prepare." "That's the point," Marcus replied. "We're not trying to sneak up on them. We're forcing them to respond publicly in front of the entire galaxy. Either they address our evidence, or they look like tyrants trying to silence the truth. They'll choose tyranny," Keeper Meridian said with absolute certainty. "The Council has invested 3,000 years in the Severance. They have shaped their entire identity around maintaining it. They would rather be revealed as murderers than admit they were wrong. Then we'll give them that choice." Marcus turned to Chen. "Send it, all of it. Let the galaxy see what the Council has hidden." Chen's fingers moved across the controls, and Marcus felt the ship shudder slightly as massive data transmissions launched simultaneously toward hundreds of destinations. Somewhere across Confederacy space, journalists were receiving the evidence dump of a lifetime. Politicians were being confronted with proof that one of their most trusted species had built their entire society on genocide and lies. And billions of Aureen were learning for the first time that everything they had been taught about the Severance was false. "Transmission complete," Chen reported. "And Captain, we're already getting responses. The networks are going insane. Some are calling it the biggest story in galactic history. Others are claiming it's elaborate propaganda. But everyone is talking about it." "Good." Marcus squeezed Valara's hand. "Time to give them something else to talk about. Ready to merge?" "Always," she replied, and initiated the neural link. Marcus had experienced this twice before, but it still hit him like diving into an ocean of crystalline consciousness. Valara's mind merged with his, her perfect memory and analytical precision blending with his tactical instincts and emotional intuition. But this time, something was different. The ship itself was part of the link, its ancient consciousness joining theirs in a triad that felt both alien and natural. "Welcome, pilots." The ship's awareness resonated through their shared mind space. "I was built 4,000 years ago by Aureen, who understood that connection was strength. I have dreamed alone for 3 millennia, waiting for someone worthy to wake me. Together, we will remind the galaxy what it means to fly free." Marcus felt the ship's systems integrate with his consciousness. He could sense every structural element, every energy conduit, every weapon and shield, as if they were extensions of his own body. Through Valara, he understood the underlying physics of how impossibly advanced technology functioned, and through the ship, he perceived space itself in ways human neurology had never evolved to process. "All hands prepare for departure," he said, his voice resonating both vocally and through the ship's communication systems. "We're going to the capital. We're going to challenge the Council, and we're going to change history." The breaking dawn lifted from the crystalline landing pad with a grace that defied its massive size. Marcus felt it respond to his intent before he even formed conscious commands, the ancient vessel and its pilots moving as one entity. They accelerated through the atmosphere, leaving the hidden world behind, and Marcus felt a pang of regret that they might never see this place again. "We'll come back," Valara thought to him through their link. "After this is over, after the severance falls, we'll bring others here. We'll show them what they could have had all along. If we survive, then we'd better make sure we do." They entered the void of space, and the ship's quantum engines engaged with a thrumming that Marcus felt in his bones. The journey to the capital would take 3 days at maximum speed, 3 days for the evidence they had released to circulate, for the Council to prepare their response, for the galaxy to choose sides in a conflict that most people hadn't even known existed yesterday. "Captain, we're being hailed," Chen's voice cut through the neural link. "Multiple sources. Some are offering support, some are threatening us, and some—" She paused. "Some are Aureen who say they've been touched accidentally and survived. They're asking if what we said is true, if they can really be free." Marcus felt Valara's consciousness flood with emotion so powerful it threatened to overwhelm their link. These were her people, reaching out across the void, desperate for hope that their isolation might end. "Tell them it's true," Valara said, her voice carrying across the bridge. "Tell them that the corruption can be destroyed, that touch is not death, that they can be whole again, and tell them that within a week they'll have a choice. Return to the severance and its lies or join us in building something better." Over the next 3 days, the galaxy transformed around them. Marcus watched through the ship's sensors and communication channels as the evidence they had released ignited debates on 1,000 worlds. The Council issued denials, calling the recordings fabricated and the genetic data manipulated, but their denials rang hollow when confronted with testimony from the hidden world's inhabitants, with scientific analysis that anyone could verify, with historical records that matched too many suppressed sources to be dismissed as fiction. Aureen colonies began reporting incidents of spontaneous touching, individuals who had seen the evidence and decided to test it themselves. Some died, consumed by corruption, as the Council had always warned, but others survived, their consciousness expanding as they experienced connection for the first time in their lives. And those survivors became advocates, spreading the truth that the severance was not absolute, that freedom was possible. "The Council is losing control of the narrative," Chen reported on the second day. "They've locked down the capital station, restricted all incoming traffic, and deployed their fleet in defensive positions. But they can't stop their own people from questioning. We're receiving reports of protests on 17 Aureen colonies, peaceful so far but growing." "Any word from Keeper Meridian's forces?" Marcus asked. "They've begun operations. Small teams touching isolated Aureen on 50 different worlds. Success rate is about 60%. The rest either die from corruption or report their liberators to the authorities. But those who survive are spreading the word, creating networks of connected Aureen who support each other." Marcus felt Valara's grief through their link, grief for those who died, for the lives lost even in the service of liberation. 40% mortality is unacceptable. There has to be a way to screen for susceptibility, to identify who can survive the transition. "We'll figure it out," Marcus thought back to her. "After we deal with the Council, after we prove that this is possible, then we can refine the process, make it safer. If there is an after, there will be." On the third day, they approached the capital system. The Aureen homeworld hung in space like a jewel, a planet of crystalline structures that had been shaped over millennia to reflect the species' aesthetic sensibilities. And orbiting it, the massive station that housed the Council, a construct so vast it qualified as a small moon, glittering with lights and bristling with weapons. "They're hailing us," Chen said. "Official channel, Council authorization codes." "Put it through." The view screen activated, revealing Councillor Eris Thane. The ancient Aureen looked even more imposing now, her crystalline form surrounded by the trappings of absolute authority. Behind her, Marcus could see the Council chamber, dozens of ancient beings who collectively ruled billions of Aureen with absolute power. "Dr. Valara Sin, Captain Marcus Webb." The Councillor's voice carried the weight of 3,000 years of accumulated authority. "You have committed treason against your species and the Confederacy itself. You have spread lies designed to undermine stability. You have stolen ancient technology and incited rebellion across dozens of worlds. Surrender immediately, and your deaths will be swift and painless." "No." Valara's voice was steady, clear, amplified by the ship's communication systems. to reach not just the Council but every listening station in the system. We will not surrender. We will not accept death for the crime of touching. And we will not allow you to maintain your lies any longer. You speak of lies? Councillor Thane's fury was palpable. You, who have been corrupted by an emotional species, you, who have abandoned everything that makes us Aureen, you dare call the severance a lie? I call it what it is, a prison you built to maintain your power. Valara's consciousness burned through their neural link, her rage and righteousness channeling through Marcus to give her strength. You killed 73 million of our people to enforce isolation. You suppressed evidence that the corruption could be defeated. You taught generations of Aureen that connection was death when you always knew, that some of us could survive it. Those who survived were aberrations, mistakes. The corruption should have claimed them, but it didn't. Marcus joined his voice to Valara's, their merged consciousness speaking with one purpose. And that terrified you. Because if some Aureen could survive touch, if connection made them stronger rather than weaker, then your entire justification for the severance collapsed. So you hunted them down, you murdered them, you erased all evidence that the severance was a choice rather than a necessity. The council chamber erupted in chaos. Some councillors were shouting denials, others were calling for immediate military action. But a few, Marcus noticed with interest, remained silent, their crystalline forms flickering with what looked like uncertainty. You have no authority to make these accusations, Councillor Thane said, her voice cutting through the noise. You are fugitives, criminals. Your testimony is worth nothing. Then let's make it worth something. Valara gestured, and Chen activated a new transmission. Throughout the capital system, on every screen and every display, the evidence began playing. Historical records of the Council's genocides, genetic analysis proving the severance was unnecessary, testimony from the hidden world's inhabitants, and most damning of all, footage of Valara herself destroying the corruption entity through the power of connection with Marcus. This is what you tried to hide, Valara said, her voice reaching billions. This is what you killed millions to suppress. The truth that Aureen are meant to connect. That isolation is not virtue, but prison. That the severance was never about protecting us, it was about controlling us. For a moment there was absolute silence. Then Councillor Thane's expression transformed into something beyond fury, beyond reason. It was the look of someone watching their entire world crumble. Destroy them, she commanded. Deploy the fleet. Use every weapon at our disposal. They must not be allowed to spread this poison further. Alarms shrieked through the breaking dawn as the Council's fleet began moving. 40 ships, each designed specifically to enforce Aureen authority, their weapons charging with lethal intent. All hands battle stations, Marcus commanded, his consciousness merging more fully with the ship. They've made their choice. Now, we make ours. The first salvo of enemy fire lanced across the void, and the battle for the future of an entire species began. Marcus felt the ship respond to his intent, shields bending space-time itself to deflect energy weapons that should have pierced their hull. The breaking dawn was ancient, but it had been designed by Aureen, who understood warfare in ways the Council's modern ships could not match. It moved with grace that defied physics, dodged with prescience that came from 3 pilots sharing one consciousness. Return fire, Marcus thought, and the ship's weapons responded, not with crude energy beams, but with something more elegant, pulses of shaped gravity that crushed enemy vessels from within, tearing apart their structural integrity without leaving marks on their hulls. Captain, we're being targeted by civilian communications satellites, Chen reported. The Council is trying to jam our transmissions, prevent the evidence from spreading further. Then we keep them busy. Marcus dove the ship toward the capital station itself, drawing the fleet's attention. As long as they're shooting at us, they can't suppress the truth. Energy fire filled the space around them, and Marcus felt the ship take damage despite its advanced shields. Warning signals flooded his consciousness, hull breaches in 3 sections, shield generators overloading, weapon systems operating beyond safe parameters. They were outnumbered 40 to 1, and even ancient technology had limits. We can't win this, Valara thought to him. Not conventionally. Then we cheat. Marcus aimed the breaking dawn directly at the capital station, accelerating to ramming speed. Trust me. He felt her absolute faith through their link, felt her consciousness merge more fully with his, felt the ship itself commit to a maneuver that would either save them or kill them all. They dove toward the station at speeds that should have been suicide, enemy fire converging on their position. shields failing, hull beginning to crack from the strain. Then, at the last possible moment, Marcus did something that only an ancient ship piloted by merged consciousness could manage. He reversed the quantum drives, creating a localized space-time distortion that stopped their momentum instantly, while sending a shockwave outward in all directions. The pursuing Council ships couldn't compensate in time. 20 of them collided with the shockwave, their modern navigation systems unable to process what had just happened. Hulls crumpled, systems failed, and the fleet that had been moments from destroying the breaking dawn found itself crippled and drifting. "Now," Marcus commanded, and Chen activated the ship's communication systems at full power. Every display in the capital system lit up simultaneously with the final piece of evidence they had been holding back. Councillor Thane's own words, recorded centuries ago, admitting that the severance was maintained not for safety, but for control, that the Council knew some Aureen could survive touch, that they had deliberately suppressed this knowledge to maintain their authority. The effect was instantaneous. Throughout the capital station, throughout the orbiting habitats, throughout the Aureen homeworld itself, billions of people heard their leaders admit to the greatest conspiracy in their species' history, and they responded with rage. "Sir, we're receiving transmissions from the surface," Chen said, her voice tight with emotion. "Mass protests. Aureen are touching each other in defiance of Council orders. Security forces are refusing to fire on their own people. And," she paused, listening to her earpiece, "multiple Council members are resigning. They're broadcasting statements condemning the severance. They're calling for Councillor Thane's removal from power." Through the view screen, Marcus watched as the great station's lights began flickering, not from damage but from chaos within. The Council was collapsing, their authority eroding in real time as 3,000 years of lies crashed down around them. "We did it," Valara whispered through their link. "By all the lights of the first choir, we actually did it." "Not yet." Marcus kept the ship on high alert, watching as the remaining Council vessels began powering down their weapons. "The severance won't fall just because we exposed the Council. We need to give people something to build toward, a new way forward." He opened a communication channel to the capital system. "My name is Captain Marcus Webb. I am human, and I am bonded to Dr. Valara Sin, an Aureen who was taught that touch would destroy her but who chose connection anyway. We stand before you as proof that the severance is not necessary, that Aureen can touch and survive, that isolation is not safety, but prison." Valara joined her voice to his. "I know you're afraid. I was afraid too. For 26 years I believed that one touch would corrupt me, destroy me, turn me into everything the Council warned against. But when Captain Webb touched me to save a dying patient, I did not fall. I grew stronger. And through our connection, I discovered what our species lost 3 millennia ago, the simple knowledge that we are meant to share our light with others. The corruption is real," Marcus continued. "We don't deny that, but it can be destroyed. With the right process, with human assistance, with courage and trust, Aureen can burn away the poison and emerge free. It's not easy. Some will not survive the transition, but those who do will rediscover what it means to be whole." On the view screen, Marcus saw movement in the Council chamber. Councillor Thane was being escorted away by security forces, her crystalline form rigid with fury and denial. Other councillors were stepping forward, their expressions suggesting they wanted to speak. One of them, an ancient Aureen Marcus didn't recognize, activated a communication channel. "I am Councillor Vex Aaron. I have served on this council for 400 years, and I have spent every one of those years knowing that we were maintaining a lie." The ancient being's voice cracked with emotion. "I believed it was necessary. I believed that exposing the truth would lead to chaos and death. But you have proven me wrong. You have shown that our people are stronger than we gave them credit for. And for my part in perpetuating the severance, I can only ask forgiveness from the billions who lived and died in isolation because of our cowardice." Other councillors began speaking, some offering resignation, some calling for investigation of their predecessors' crimes, some simply admitting that they had been wrong. And throughout the system, Marcus could see Aureen beginning to touch each other, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as they discovered that connection did not mean death. "We're receiving word from Keeper Meridian," Chen reported. "The liberation forces are standing down. With the Council collapsing and the capital system in revolution, they're shifting to support mode, helping newly touched Aureen through the corruption burning process, establishing networks of connected." Individuals who can support each other. Casualties, Valara asked quietly. High, approximately 35% mortality among those attempting first contact, but that's better than the 40% we were seeing before, and the survival rate is improving as people learn the process. Chen paused. Sir, there's someone asking to speak with you. A young Aureen who says they were inspired by your testimony to touch their bonded partner for the first time in 60 years of marriage. Marcus felt his throat tighten. Put them through. The screen shifted to show an elderly Aureen couple standing hand in hand, their crystalline forms glowing with light that suggested both ancient age and newborn joy. They looked at Marcus and Valara with expressions of gratitude so profound it was painful to witness. Thank you, one of them said simply. For 60 years, my partner and I have lived side by side without ever knowing the feeling of our structures touching. We obeyed the severance because we believed it kept us safe, but today we chose each other. We touched, and we survived. For the first time in our lives, we are truly together. Through the neural link, Marcus felt Valara's response, joy mixed with grief for all the couples who had lived and died without knowing this possibility existed, all the families who had raised children without ever holding them, all the individuals who had spent entire lifetimes in isolation, believing it was the only way to survive. You deserve more than thanks, Valara replied, her voice shaking. You deserve a galaxy where connection is celebrated rather than forbidden. And we're going to build that galaxy, starting today. Over the next hours, Marcus and Valara remained in orbit above the Aureen homeworld, coordinating with the emerging new government, providing guidance to those attempting their first touches, and generally serving as the symbols of hope that Keeper Meridian had predicted they would become. The Breaking Dawn's medical bay became a temporary triage center, with Valara walking newly touched Aureen through the corruption-burning process via remote communication. And slowly, tentatively, and possibly, a new civilization began to emerge from the ashes of the old. Captain? Rodriguez's voice came through the ship's internal communication. I hate to interrupt the historic revolution and all, but we've got a problem. Our quantum drives are shot from that last maneuver. Hull integrity is at 40%, and several key systems are running on emergency backups. We need repairs, and we need them soon. Can we make it to the surface? Maybe. But landing this thing in its current condition? That's going to be rough. Marcus looked at Valara, felt her exhaustion through their link matching his own. They had been in neural merge for almost 4 days straight, longer than should have been possible, but somehow together they had endured. Take us down, he decided. We've done what we came here to do. Time to let others carry the revolution forward. The Breaking Dawn limped toward the Aureen homeworld surface, its ancient structure groaning with damage, but still responding to their merged consciousness with loyalty that transcended mere programming. They landed in a field outside the capital city, and Marcus finally broke the neural link. The separation hit like losing a limb. He staggered, would have fallen if Valara hadn't caught him. Through their maintained physical contact, he could still sense her, but it was muted compared to the full merger they had just experienced. We did it, he said, pulling her close. We actually did it. Phase 1, Valara corrected, but she was smiling. The severance is falling, but rebuilding an entire civilization, that's going to take decades. Good thing we've got time. They emerged from the ship to find a crowd waiting. Aureen of all ages, many of them holding hands or touching for what was clearly the first time, their crystalline forms glowing with emotions they were still learning to name. And among them, transported from the hidden world, was Light Dancer, the child who had hugged Valara and taught her that affection didn't require words. The small Aureen ran forward, wrapping their arms around Valara with the unself-conscious joy of children everywhere. You did it. You taught them how to touch. Valara knelt down, returning the embrace with a grace that suggested she was finally learning how this worked. We all did it. Every person who chose connection over isolation, every Aureen who touched despite their fear, every human who helped an Aureen burn away their corruption. This was never about me and Marcus. It was about all of us choosing to be brave enough to change. Marcus felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to find Keeper Meridian standing there, their ancient form showing signs of exhaustion from the massive coordination effort they had been managing. The casualty count stands at just over 2 million, the Keeper said quietly. Aureen who attempted contact and succumbed to corruption before it could be destroyed. The Council is calling it a tragedy. Some are already saying we should have maintained the severance, that these deaths prove they were right all along. And the others? Marcus asked. 800 million. Keeper Meridian's voice filled with wonder. 800 million Aureen, who have successfully touched another being and survived, who have burned away their corruption and emerged free, who are building networks of connection that span worlds. The Severance is not just falling, Captain Webb. It is being torn down with joyous abandon by people who finally understand what they were missing. Marcus looked out across the field at the crowd of Aureen touching, embracing, merging their lights in patterns of impossible beauty. His crew was there, Chen and Morrison and Rodriguez and all the others, surrounded by Aureen, who wanted to thank the humans who had helped spark their revolution. And everywhere he looked, he saw hope replacing fear, connection replacing isolation, joy replacing the sterile perfection that the Council had enforced for 3 millennia. What happens now? Valara asked. With us, I mean. We're not exactly military anymore, and I'm not sure I can go back to being just a doctor. Then don't. Marcus pulled her close, feeling her crystalline form solid and warm against him. We're the first human Aureen bonded pair in recorded history. We've got unique skills, unique perspectives, and apparently a talent for starting revolutions. I'm sure we can find something useful to do. Like what? Like helping establish protocols for safe first contact between species. Like teaching other Aureen human pairs how to merge consciousness without losing themselves. Like exploring the galaxy together and proving that connection between different species is not just possible, but beneficial. He smiled at her. Like being together and figuring out the rest as we go. Valara's crystalline structure began to glow brighter, her emotional response visible for anyone to see. Together. I like the sound of that. They stood together in the field outside the capital city, surrounded by a civilization being reborn, while above them the stars wheeled in patterns that suggested infinite possibility. The Severance was falling, the Council was collapsing, and a new age was beginning, an age where Aureen could touch freely, where humans and Aureen could bond as equals, where isolation was no longer mistaken for safety. It wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks, resistance, moments when the old ways seemed simpler than the new. But as Marcus stood holding Valara's hand, feeling her consciousness touching his through their maintained contact, he knew with absolute certainty that they had done something worth doing. They had sparked a revolution. They had freed billions. They had proven that connection was stronger than isolation, that truth was more powerful than lies, and that love, that strange, impossible, transcendent force that humans had named but never fully understood, could bridge any gap, heal any wound, and transform any darkness into light. The Severance was broken, and the galaxy would never be the same. 6 months had passed since the Severance fell. Marcus stood at the viewport of what had once been Frontier Station Epsilon, and was now something entirely different. A hub for human Aureen cooperation, a training center for newly touched individuals, and the headquarters of an organization they were calling the Connection Initiative. The station had been transformed, its sterile medical bays replaced with communal spaces where Aureen could learn to touch safely, its isolation protocols dismantled in favor of open areas designed for connection and shared consciousness. Behind him he heard the familiar crystalline chime of Valara's approach. 6 months, and he still felt that thrill of recognition whenever she was near, that sense of completeness that came from knowing his bonded partner was close. "You're brooding again," she said, wrapping her arms around him from behind in a gesture that had once been impossible for her species and was now becoming commonplace. "The testimonies are bothering you." Through their maintained physical contact, Marcus didn't need to confirm what she already knew. The Connection Initiative had been collecting stories from across Aureen space, testimonies of those who had successfully transitioned to a touching society, and equally important, testimonies from the families of those who hadn't survived the process. 2.3 million dead, Marcus said quietly. That's the final count. 2.3 million Aureen who tried to touch after the Severance fell and died from corruption before it could be burned away. And 900 million who survived. Valara rested her crystalline head against his shoulder. "Marcus, we knew there would be casualties. We knew the corruption was real and deadly, but we also knew that the alternative was billions living in isolation forever. What we did, what we started, it saved more lives than it cost. Tell that to the parents who lost children, the partners who lost their bonded ones, I have." Valara's voice was gentle but firm. "I've spoken to hundreds of families who lost someone to the transition, and yes, they grieve. Yes, they question whether their loved one's death was worth it. But Marcus, I've also spoken to thousands who survived, who are now living lives of connection and joy that they never imagined possible, who are touching their children for the first time, holding their partners, building communities based on shared consciousness rather than enforced isolation. The balance of good over harm is clear. Marcus turned to face her, cupping her crystalline face in his hands. How do you stay so certain, even after everything we've seen? Because I remember what isolation felt like. Valara's faceted eyes reflected his face in 1,000 fragments. 26 years of perfect competence and absolute loneliness. 26 years of believing that the emptiness I felt was normal, was virtue, was the price of being Aureen. If someone had told me then that I could touch another being, that I could merge consciousness with you and feel what it means to be truly connected, I would have risked any percentage chance of death for that opportunity. Even a 40% chance? Even a 90% chance. She smiled, that expression she had been practicing for 6 months, and still sometimes got slightly wrong. Because the alternative wasn't living, Marcus. It was existing, and I would rather live for one day touching you than exist for 1,000 years in isolation. Before Marcus could respond, Lieutenant Chen's voice came through the station's communication system. Captain Webb, Dr. Sin, you're needed in Conference Room 7. We have visitors from the Confederacy Council. Marcus and Valara exchanged glances. The Confederacy's response to the fall of the Severance had been complicated, to say the least. Some species celebrated Aureen liberation, others worried about the political instability it created, and a few had openly questioned whether allowing billions of Aureen to suddenly become a touching, emotionally expressive society was wise. Conference Room 7 had been redesigned to accommodate both flesh-based and crystalline anatomies. Around the table sat representatives from a dozen species, including, Marcus noted with interest, several Aureen who bore the deep crystalline complexity that suggested centuries of connection. These must be from the hidden world, now emerging to help rebuild their species' civilization. Captain Webb, Dr. Sin. The speaker was a Therium diplomat, her 3 hearts visible through her translucent skin. Thank you for meeting with us on such short notice. We have a situation that requires your unique expertise. What kind of situation? Valara asked, settling into a seat designed for Aureen physiology. One of the ancient Aureen, Marcus recognized Keeper Meridian, spoke up. In the 6 months since the Severance fell, we have observed an unexpected phenomenon. Aureen who successfully transition to a touching society do not simply return to their previous lives. They seek connection with other species as well. Human Aureen bonds like yours are becoming increasingly common, but we are also seeing Aureen forming connections with Therium, Kralix, Velkan, and other species. That's wonderful, Marcus said, though he could sense there was more to this story. It is, the Therium diplomat agreed, but it is also creating diplomatic complications. Most Confederacy species have taboos or protocols around interspecies relationships. We are not equipped, culturally or legally, to handle a sudden influx of Aureen seeking to bond with members of other species. You're asking us to help establish guidelines, Valara said slowly, protocols for safe interspecies connection that respect both parties' cultures while allowing for genuine bond formation. We are asking you to do what you did for the Aureen, Keeper Meridian said, to prove that connection across species boundaries is not just possible, but beneficial. To be the example that others can follow. Marcus felt Valara's consciousness touch his through their maintained physical contact, sensed her mixture of excitement and trepidation. That's a tall order. We barely understand our own bond. How are we supposed to teach others? The same way you taught Aureen to touch, the Therium diplomat said, by doing it, by documenting the process, by being honest about both the benefits and the challenges. Captain Webb, Dr. Atom, Sin, you are not just the first human Aureen bonded pair in recorded history. You are pioneers in something that could reshape how all Confederacy species interact with each other. Over the next hour, they discussed the proposal in detail. The Confederacy wanted to establish centers for interspecies connection, facilities where beings from different species could learn to form bonds safely with proper medical support and psychological counseling. Marcus and Valara would lead the initiative, drawing on their own experience and the research they had been conducting over the past 6 months. There's one more thing, Keeper Meridian said as the meeting was concluding. We have detected signals from beyond Confederacy space, deep void transmissions using ancient Aureen protocols. We believe there may be other colonies like ours, other groups who fled the Severance and have been hiding for millennia. They are reaching out now, asking if it is safe to return. Marcus felt excitement surge through him. How many colonies are we talking about? Unknown. But the signals suggest at least 50, perhaps more. If even half of them have populations similar to our own, we could be looking at nearly 1 billion Aureen who never accepted the severance, who have been maintaining connection for 3,000 years in isolation from the rest of the galaxy. We need to contact them, Valara said immediately. Bring them home. Let them know that the severance has fallen and they are safe to return. That is where you come in. Keeper Meridian manipulated a holographic display, showing a map of signals originating from deep space. These colonies are scattered across the galaxy, many in regions that are not well charted. We need ambassadors. Teams of human Aureen bonded pairs who can travel to these locations, make contact, and help reintegrate these lost populations into modern Aureen society. Marcus looked at Valara, felt her consciousness bright with possibility through their bond. You're asking us to explore the galaxy. We are asking you to complete what you started, Keeper Meridian replied. You broke the severance. You freed billions. Now help us gather all of our scattered people and build a civilization that celebrates connection rather than fears it. After the meeting ended, Marcus and Valara walked through the station's transformed corridors. Where once there had been sterile isolation, now there were communal areas filled with Aureen learning to touch, humans teaching them the nuances of physical affection, and mixed species groups exploring what connection meant across biological boundaries. They passed a meditation chamber, where an Aureen elder was teaching a group of younglings how to merge consciousness safely. They saw a couple, one Aureen, one human, practicing the neural link that would allow them to pilot ancient vessels together. They witnessed a child, no more than 5 years old, reaching out to touch an Aureen's crystalline hand with the fearless curiosity that only children possessed. This was what they had fought for. This was what 2 million Aureen had died to achieve. Not just the absence of the severance, but the presence of connection, real, physical, emotional connection that transcended species boundaries and created community where isolation had once reigned. What do you think? Valara asked as they reached their private quarters, about the exploration mission, about spending years traveling to distant colonies and bringing them home. Marcus pulled her close, feeling her crystalline structure warm against him. I think it sounds perfect. You and me exploring the unknown, making first contact with populations who have been isolated for millennia, proving that connection is possible even across vast distances. He smiled at her. Besides, I promised you we'd explore the galaxy together. Might as well make it official. It will be dangerous. Some of these colonies may not trust outsiders. Some may have developed cultures that diverge significantly from modern Aureen society. And we will be gone for years, perhaps decades. Then it's a good thing I already found my home. Marcus touched his forehead to hers in the gesture that had become their private shorthand for I love you, words that still felt inadequate for what they had become to each other. Wherever you are, that's where I belong. Through their bond, he felt Valara's emotional response, joy and love and absolute certainty that they were making the right choice. Then we go. We explore. We bring our scattered people home, and we prove that connection is the most powerful force in the galaxy. They spent that night in their quarters, merged in consciousness the way they often were now, sharing thoughts and memories and dreams for the future. Through their link, Marcus experienced Valara's plans for the lost colonies, how she would approach them, what medical protocols she would establish, how she would help them integrate into a civilization that had changed beyond recognition in their absence. And Valara experienced Marcus's memories of Earth, of the family he had lost, of the loneliness he had carried until the day he walked into a medical bay and touched an untouchable doctor. She felt his love for her like a physical presence in their shared mind space, and she returned it with the crystalline certainty that only Aureen could achieve. This was what bonding meant, not just physical touch or even neural linking, but this deep, unshakable knowledge that another consciousness existed, that chose you, that valued you, that would stand beside you against any darkness the galaxy could conjure. The next morning, they met with the crew that would accompany them on their journey. Chen had been promoted to commander and would serve as their executive officer. Rodriguez had spent 6 months learning to communicate with ancient Aureen ships and was now their chief engineer. Morrison and Park had completed training in interspecies diplomacy and would serve as their cultural liaison officers. And joining them were 6 Aureen from the hidden world, volunteers who wanted to help bring their scattered cousins home. "We're calling her the Eternal Connection," Rodriguez said, gesturing toward the viewport where their new ship was docked. It was larger than the Breaking Dawn, designed for long-range exploration and equipped with both modern Confederacy technology and ancient Aureen systems. "She's got quantum drives that can cross the galaxy in months instead of years, neural link interfaces for the entire crew, and medical facilities capable of handling any known physiology. She's not just a ship, she's a home." Marcus studied the vessel through the viewport, feeling Valara's presence beside him, her hand in his. "When do we launch?" 48 hours, Chen replied. "We've loaded supplies for a 3-year mission, though we can resupply at any Confederacy station if needed. Our first destination is the Kepler Void, a region beyond Confederacy space, where we've detected the strongest signals from a lost colony." 3 years, Valara said softly. 3 years exploring the unknown. 3 years making contact with populations who fled the Severance millennia ago. 3 years proving that connection can survive any distance, any challenge, any obstacle. "Sounds perfect," Marcus replied. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of preparation. They said goodbye to colleagues who had become friends, to the station that had been their home during the reconstruction, to the civilization they had helped rebuild. Keeper Meridian came to see them off personally, their ancient form glowing with pride. "You have done more than free our species," the Keeper said, placing a crystalline hand on both Marcus and Valara's shoulders. "You have reminded us what it means to be alive, what it means to connect, what it means to choose each other across any barrier the universe can place between beings. Take that knowledge to our lost colonies. Show them that they no longer need to hide." On launch day, Marcus and Valara stood together on the bridge of the Eternal Connection, their hands linked in preparation for the neural merge that would bring the ship to full life. Around them their crew took their stations, humans and Aureen working side by side, their efficiency born not just from training, but from genuine connection. "All systems ready," Rodriguez reported from engineering. "Quantum drives charged and standing by," Park added. "Communications array online," Chen confirmed. "We're ready to broadcast our findings back to Confederacy space as we make each discovery." Marcus looked at Valara, felt her consciousness reaching toward his in anticipation of the merge. "Ready to change the galaxy again? With you? Always." They initiated the neural link, and Marcus felt his consciousness merge with Valara's and through her to the ship itself. The Eternal Connection came alive around them, its ancient technology harmonizing with modern systems to create something greater than the sum of its parts. Through the ship's enhanced sensors, Marcus perceived the galaxy in ways no unaugmented human could, as patterns of energy and matter, of life and connection, of infinite possibility waiting to be explored. "This is Captain Marcus Webb of the Eternal Connection," he said, his voice carrying through both standard communication channels and the neural network that now linked all Aureen in a loose web of shared consciousness. "We are departing on a mission to contact lost colonies of Aureen who fled the Severance 3,000 years ago. Our goal is to bring them home, to show them that connection is no longer forbidden, and to prove that no matter how far we wander, we are never truly alone. To anyone listening, whether Aureen or human or any other species in this vast galaxy, remember that isolation is not safety, connection is not weakness, and love in all its forms is the force that binds the universe together." Valara added her voice to his, their merged consciousness speaking as one. "We were taught that touch would destroy us, but it saved us. We were told that connection was death, but it gave us life. We were promised that isolation was the only way to survive, but we have discovered that survival without connection is not living at all. So we go into the void, not as separate beings, but as partners. Not as human and Aureen, but as something new, proof that any barrier can be crossed if we are brave enough to reach out and touch." The Eternal Connection engaged its quantum drives, and the universe twisted around them in ways that defied human comprehension. They were moving faster than light, crossing distances that would have taken generations using conventional propulsion. But through the neural link, through the bond they shared, through the love that had sparked a revolution and freed billions, Marcus and Valara remained absolutely certain of their course. They were heading toward the lost colonies, toward populations who had been hiding for 3 millennia, waiting for permission to stop hiding, toward a future where Aureen could be whole again, where humans and crystalline beings could bond as equals, where connection was celebrated rather than feared. But more than that, they were heading toward each other, Two beings who had found their home not in any physical location, but in the simple act of choosing to touch, despite every warning, every prohibition, every fear that isolation was safer than connection. Marcus looked at Valara through their merged consciousness, saw her as she truly was, brilliant and brave and absolutely certain that they were doing something worth doing. And he felt, with the clarity that only neural linking could provide, her perception of him, not a captain or a warrior, or even a revolutionary, but simply Marcus, the human who had dared to touch an untouchable doctor and in doing so had changed the course of galactic history. "I love you," he thought to her through their link, words that would never be adequate but were all he had. "I love you," she replied, her consciousness wrapping around his like a protective shell. "For the rest of our lives, for however long we have together, for as many stars as we explore, and as many lost colonies as we find, I love you." The eternal connection pierced the veil between known and unknown space, carrying its crew toward challenges they couldn't predict and discoveries they couldn't imagine. Behind them, a civilization was being rebuilt based on connection rather than isolation. Ahead of them, lost colonies waited to be found and brought home. And within the ship, in the merged consciousness of a human captain and an Aureen doctor, a truth burned bright enough to light the entire galaxy. That connection was stronger than isolation, that love was more powerful than fear, and that no distance, no danger, no force in the universe could separate beings who had chosen each other across every barrier existence could place between them. The severance had fallen, and in its place, something infinitely better was being born. A civilization based not on fear of touch, but on celebration of connection, where humans and Aureen and all the species of the galaxy could reach out to each other without fear, where children would grow up knowing the warmth of embrace rather than the coldness of isolation, where love in all its forms could flourish without restriction. It was the dawn of a new age, and Marcus and Valara, hand in hand, consciousness merged, hearts beating in synchronization across the impossible divide of species and biology, sailed into that dawn together, two beings who had proven that the simple act of touching could change everything, and who would spend the rest of their lives showing the galaxy that connection was not just possible, but necessary for any civilization that wanted to truly thrive. The stars wheeled above them, the void stretched endlessly ahead, and somewhere in the darkness, lost colonies waited for the message that it was finally safe to come home. The revolution was complete, the severance was broken, and love, that strange, impossible, transcendent force that humans had named but never fully understood, had proven itself to be the most powerful weapon and the gentlest touch in the entire universe. Together, they had changed everything. Together, they would explore infinity. Together, they were home. The end.